666 AD, a fierce battle raged, with soldiers clashing swords and blood splattering across the field. The great magister, Yahello, who was the guardian god of Gali, died. His body lay still, marking the end of an era. Everything went silent for a moment. The world held its breath. Yahello's death brought a great schism to Gali. Gali no longer had the means to stop the 100,000-strong army of the Tang dynasty. 2 years passed. It was now the year 668 AD. A blade flashed in the sun. A man kneeled on the wooden platform, awaiting death. Below, other soldiers looked on, and as he cried out, "Father, please spare me!" a general sat high on his horse, sneering at the Gali soldiers. He laughed. "Look at those Gali bastards trembling. Ooh, ha ha ha." The fighting continued without end. The man on the platform continued to beg, his voice cracking with fear. "Spare me. Please spare me. I beg you." A soldier responded coldly. "Blame your misfortune of being born in the wrong country." The man could only groan in despair. The executioner raised his sword, bringing it down with a sickening thud. Blood splattered across the platform. They gasped, recognizing the red three-legged crow flags in the distance. Gasp! Those people are the red three-legged crow flag? The cavalry charged forward, their armor gleaming in the sun. The soldiers shouted in excitement. "It's the black armored demon cavalry. Gali's cavalry has arrived." The soldier yelled at the top of his lungs, trying to keep everyone calm. "Do not panic." He looked absolutely furious. The general sat high on his horse, surrounded by his troops. He spoke with arrogance, believing their victory was assured. He gestured with his sword, declaring that the Gali scum were no match for them. A commander rode a war boar and charged straight toward the enemy. He shouted his challenge over the din of battle. "I'll show you, black armored demon cavalry commander. Face my spear." The black armored demon cavalry charged forward with unstoppable momentum, their hooves pounding the earth. They were a storm of steel and fury, ready to crash into the enemy lines. In a flash, the general's blade cut through the air, meeting its mark with deadly precision. The enemy commander on the war boar didn't even have time to react before he was struck down. The troops watched in stunned silence as the general's attack landed. They couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. The general, in a single stroke, the general stood tall over the fallen commander, his sword dripping with blood. The air was thick with the smell of death, a testament to his overwhelming power. Panic surged through the ranks as the troops realized the battle was turning against them. "Saint, stop him!" they screamed, desperate to stop the general's advance. The battle was a storm of steel and blood, a brutal dance of death. Soldiers screamed as they fell, their cries lost in the roar of combat. More and more soldiers fell, each death a brutal punctuation mark in the ongoing carnage. The air was thick with the smell of blood and the sounds of dying men. Ground was littered with corpses, a testament to the ferocity of the fighting. The realization hit like a hammer. The black armored demon cavalry. Another soldier lay lifeless among the carnage. A voice cut through the chaos, filled with dread. "Cursed war demons." A soldier braced himself as a spear hurtled toward him, the point glinting with deadly intent. The fight for survival was far from over. The general's gaze was firm, his eyes narrowed with determination. He knew what had to be done. A soldier shouted a warning, his voice filled with panic. Tang forces were swarming from the rear, threatening to overwhelm their position. Great Saja gave his orders clearly and quickly. He told Hui to lead the friendly forces to Pyongyang Fortress and protect the civilians. He assured him that Buru and Uru would hold off the enemy. The warrior gripped his weapon tightly. He declared that he would clear the path, his voice ringing with resolve. The spear surged forward, a deadly point leading the charge. The battle was about to begin again. The battlefield was a mess of clashing steel and desperate cries, a whirlwind of death. The Tang soldiers swarmed, their numbers pressing relentlessly against the defenders. The order came down to fall back. The soldiers shouted to stick close and run, warning each other not to look back at the approaching enemy. One soldier stepped forward, pleading with the general to let him fight. He declared that he wanted to protect his family and Gali with his own hands, his voice cracking with emotion as he addressed the general as his father. The soldier repeated his plea, his eyes fixed on the general. He was determined to fight, no matter the cost. The general paused, his expression unreadable. He asked the soldier if he could ride a horse, explaining that if he couldn't ride, he couldn't fight. The soldier stammered, unable to answer. The general commanded his men to give the young soldier a horse. He then told his son that was enough, and he needed to go protect his mother and sibling. The general's voice was stern, but his eyes betrayed his worry. The general shouted out his next orders, his voice booming across the field. He commanded everyone to gather the elderly, children, and wounded, and head for Pyongyang Fortress. There was no time to waste. The general's son turned to look back at the battlefield, his expression filled with worry. He knew he had to obey his father's orders, but leaving him behind felt like a betrayal. The boy looked towards his father, pleading with him to come back alive. Far behind him, the army marched forward, a sea of soldiers ready to face the enemy. The enemy commander roared, his face contorted with rage. He commanded his troops to not let a single one escape, his voice echoing across the battlefield. The soldiers marched forward, their voices rising in a unified roar. The ground vibrated with each step they took, a deafening thud echoing across the field. A group of civilians sprinted towards the fortress gates, their faces etched with fear. They desperately hoped to find safety behind the thick stone walls and the large, imposing red door. The scene outside the gate was one of utter despair. Injured and exhausted, the civilians begged for the soldiers to open the gates, their voices filled with desperation. The soldier stood guard, his face unreadable, as he listened to the pleas from outside. He looked like he was struggling with his duty, torn between orders and compassion. Tears streamed down the civilian's face as they pounded on the gate, begging for help. Their cries echoed in the courtyard, a desperate plea for salvation. The captain of the guard looked grim as he spoke. He asked if there was truly no other way to avoid this disaster. The soldier knelt, his voice filled with despair. He said to kill him, knowing the enemy's numbers were too great to overcome. Someone started laughing, a crazed sound that filled the air. The laughter suggested they had clearly lost it. The captain of the guard, under Emperor Demudiok Yahello, urged his leader to escape. He warned that the encirclement was tightening, and there was no time left. The emperor lamented that he had failed to protect the nation, founded by King Dongmyung. He wondered where he could even go. The captain responded that a ship had been prepared, urging him to sail south, gather his forces, and rebuild. Emperor Demudiok Yahello lay there, staring up at the ceiling. He looked like he had given up, completely drained of hope. The emperor wondered who was left to fight if they gathered their forces. Was there anyone still willing to stand against the enemy? The captain of the guard interrupted, asking if the great Saja, Go Jinshun, was still present. He seemed to be suggesting that Go Jinshun might be the answer. The emperor considered this. The great Saja, so he remained. The thought gave him a flicker of hope. The captain of the guard knelt before the emperor. He asked if his majesty would grant him one request. The emperor lay there, lost in thought. He was probably wondering what would happen next, and if there was any hope left. Delete entire narration. The ground was littered with bodies. The cost of war was being paid in blood. The armored warrior stood tall, his sword dripping with blood. Your death will be remembered by your son, he said, his voice cold and final. The battlefield was a scene of carnage. Dead soldiers and horses were scattered across the ground, a testament to the ferocity of the fighting. The warrior surveyed the battlefield, a sea of Tang Dynasty soldiers stretching before them. He said something. He then asked if they were scared. He grinned, proposing a contest to see who could kill more. He added, 2 warriors stood side by side, observing the unfolding battle. One of them said. The other responded with a simple, "Is that so?" The warrior turned, his back to the battlefield. It looked like moving forward would be tough from now on. One of the warriors turned to the other, a fierce glint in his eyes. He said something. The warrior grinned, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. He said something. The army advanced, a sea of mounted warriors moving as one. They were ready for anything, their spears raised high, reflecting the sun. From above, the battlefield spread out like a chessboard, with soldiers lined up on both sides. It was a terrifying sight, the calm before the storm. The fighting was about to begin. It was time to see who would survive. The warrior smiled, a glint in his eye. He was looking forward to the fight, ready to spill some blood. The final battlefield should be quite thrilling. The warrior's face was grim, his eyes narrowed with determination. He vowed that not a single enemy soldier would set foot inside Pyongyang Fortress. 2 men stood in the doorway, talking quietly. The air was thick with anticipation as they wondered what was about to happen. A lone rider approached the fortress gates, the sound of his horse's hooves echoing. People stopped what they were doing to watch him arrive, wondering what news he carried. The great Saja Go Jinshun obeyed the Yolji's command, and ordered everyone to retreat. The soldiers exchanged worried glances, questioning the order. One asked if retreating would put Pyongyang fortress in danger, but the other suggested that the Yolji must have a plan. The officer barked out orders, telling everyone to move to the ships prepared at the port. They were to await further instructions, but the urgency in his voice was clear. The soldiers figured that the Yolja intended to sail south and regroup his forces. One of them scoffed, calling him a noble. The soldier spat, saying that the Yolja had ruined the country and fled, looking pathetic. He muttered that he should have put a hole in his skull himself. He then shouted for the general. A messenger arrived, reporting that a Tang cavalry force of 500 was pursuing a carriage that had left Pyongyang fortress. He assumed it was another noble fleeing. The messenger's eyes widened as he realized something. The carriage had the Yolja's flag flying on it. The officer yelled, ordering the guards to form a shield. He told them to stretch out to cover the carriage, not letting a single arrow through. The Tang cavalry raced across the open land, kicking up dust. They were gaining on the carriage, determined to catch it. The soldier called out to the general, saying he would buy time and asking him to go on ahead. Go. Jinxian refused, saying that was nonsense. Someone shouted for the vice captain of the guard, calling out to him. The soldier looked at the others and yelled that they had to protect His Highness, the Crown Prince. The soldiers around him raised their spears, ready to defend the carriage at all costs. The rider coughed, blood splattering from his lips. He tasted iron and pain, knowing he'd taken a bad hit. Another rider went down, the force of the blow sending him reeling. He barely managed a grunt before falling. The vice captain of the guard barked orders, yelling for the cavalry to pick up the pace. He said they could catch them soon if they just pushed harder. The soldiers rode hard, their armor gleaming in the sun. They were focused on one thing, catching the carriage. The clash was sudden and brutal, spears splintering against shields. The soldiers fought with a desperate ferocity, knowing what was at stake. The rider felt a sharp pain shoot through him. He coughed, trying to clear his head. The battlefield stretched out before them, a chaotic mix of dust and blood. The riders charged forward, their destination clear. The captain of the guard, Great Saja, watched the battle unfold. He knew they were running out of time. The Great Saja gave the order, his voice cold and hard. He commanded all forces to annihilate them, letting not a single one escape. The soldiers grunted with effort, the sounds of battle echoing around them. The clash of steel on steel filled the air as they fought for their lives. The battlefield was a whirlwind of clashing steel and desperate cries. Soldiers fought and died in a tangled mess of limbs and weapons, each swing a desperate attempt to survive. The soldier roared as he cut down the two demons. He was determined to wipe out those monsters. With a confident grin, the archer prepared to fire. He boasted that he could take down two bastards with one shot. The soldier's hand clenched into a fist, knuckles white with rage. He was ready to crush anyone who stood in his way. Yuel Juburu roared, his face contorted with fury. He declared he was going to crush them all. The ground shook as the cavalry charged forward, a wave of mounted soldiers ready to crash into the enemy lines. Each rider gripped their spear, focused on the battle ahead. The captain of the guard demanded to know if the Yahello was inside the carriage. He was told it wasn't him. Then who was it? The answer came back. It was His Highness, the Crown Prince. The guards stood tall and silent, their armor gleaming in the sunlight. They were an impenetrable wall, protecting the carriage and its precious cargo from any threat. A faint rainbow arced behind them, an odd sight amidst the chaos. The carriage stood ready, the guards tense and watchful. The red flag fluttered in the wind, a symbol of the Crown Prince's presence. They had to get out of here, and fast. They continued their journey through the forest, the carriage rumbling along the dirt path. The soldiers stayed alert, their eyes scanning the trees for any sign of danger. The guards stood firm, their faces grim. They were ready to give their lives to protect the carriage and its precious cargo. One of the guards asked if it was truly a decree from His Majesty. He was told yes, His Majesty Yaolji had ordered them to escort the young emperor by ship to a safe location. The image was a logo, nothing important to see here. The carriage and its escort continued on, the sun beginning to set. The sky was painted with hues of orange and purple as they pressed forward. The path snaked its way through the mountains, a thin white line against the green landscape. In the distance, the ships waited, their dark shapes promising escape. One of the guards figured that at their current speed, they should reach their destination around sunrise. The soldiers nodded, their faces grim with determination. Suddenly, a soldier shouted to the general that the enemy was here. The news spread quickly through the ranks, and the soldiers tensed, ready for a fight. One of the soldiers cursed, wondering how those bastards had tracked them down. He yelled that he was going to split their skulls with his arrows, telling URU to save some for him. He ordered the rest to protect the young emperor and the Gauri. The Goguryeo troops rode hard across the field, their armor gleaming in the sunlight. The air crackled with anticipation as they closed in on the enemy's position. They were ready to fight. The soldier at the front pointed towards the horizon, his voice ringing out. He yelled that the enemy forces were over there, and the soldiers gripped their weapons tighter, bracing for the coming battle. The commander's voice cut through the chaos as he shouted to URU. He commanded URU to fire at once, his voice leaving no room for hesitation. The archers released their arrows, and the sky filled with whistling death. The arrows flew towards the enemy, each one carrying the promise of destruction. The battle had begun. The archer grinned, a flash of teeth in the heat of battle. He muttered that he could take down 2 with each arrow, clearly enjoying the carnage. He was right where he wanted to be. The archer took aim. His eyes narrowed in concentration. He released the arrow, sending it soaring into the sky, the first of many. The air crackled with anticipation as the archers prepared their next volley. The arrows rained down on the enemy soldiers, each one finding its mark with deadly accuracy. Men screamed as they fell, their armor offering little protection against the onslaught. The battlefield was quickly turning into a scene of chaos and death. The Goguryeo troops surged forward, their horses thundering across the battlefield. They were a force of nature, unstoppable in their advance. The general surveyed the battlefield, his expression grim. He knew what was coming, and he steeled himself for the fight ahead. The carriage sped along the road, surrounded by its protectors. The dust kicked up by the horses' hooves billowed around them, a sign of their desperate flight. The woman held the baby close, whispering, "It's all right. We're almost there." She tried to soothe the child, hoping to shield him from the danger that surrounded them. Suddenly, the carriage lurched violently, throwing the woman and baby against the side. The baby cried out in terror, the sound piercing the air. Tang forces were coming from the coastline too. Shield bearers were ordered to come forward and block them. The clash was unavoidable. The order to raise shields echoed across the line. The soldiers braced themselves, knowing the enemy's attack was about to crash against them. The commander shouted for the soldiers to hold the line at all costs. They stood firm, a wall of shields and spears against the coming storm. The Tang cavalry charged forward, a wave of horses and steel. Arrows rained down on the defenders, each impact a test of their resolve. The commander's voice boomed across the battlefield, urging them to hold back the enemy until the young emperor was safely aboard the ship. He yelled for them to endure until the great envoy arrived. The soldier slashed through the enemy ranks, his sword a blur of motion. Each strike was a desperate attempt to hold back the tide, a dance of death amidst the chaos. The Tang army advanced, a sea of soldiers beneath their banners. They seemed ready to crush anyone who stood in their way. Wei Cheng-hyun introduced himself as the true guard general of the great Tang Empire. He believed victory was already his. Wei Cheng-hyun offered them a deal, saying that if they surrendered, he would ask His Imperial Majesty to let them fight for the Tang Empire. He waited for their answer. An arrow flew towards Wei Cheng-hyun in response to his offer. Wei Cheng-hyun's face twisted in shock as the arrow pierced him. He had just begun to say he would make them his right hand, mistaking their intent. The arrow flew true, piercing right through Wei Cheng-hyun. The boastful general was silenced in an instant, his arrogance replaced with shock. He added that the guy looked just like Taizong, the same Taizong of Tang who lost an eye after being struck by an arrow in the Battle of Ansi Fortress. The leader gave a curt order. HWW, I should go. His tone left no room for argument. The man raised his sword high, yelling for all troops to ready themselves. The troops surged forward with a battle cry, weapons raised. The clash of steel and the screams of the wounded filled the air as the two armies collided. Wei Cheng-hyun's face was twisted in pain as he fell backwards, defeated. Below, the cavalry charged forward, ready to avenge their fallen general. The ground trembled beneath the hooves of the charging horses. The cavalry was like a storm, sweeping across the battlefield and crushing everything in their path. The soldiers braced themselves, forming a shield wall against the oncoming attack. The ship behind them loomed large, a symbol of hope and escape. The soldier's face was grim as he surveyed the battlefield, his eyes filled with a mix of determination and sorrow. All around him, bodies lay scattered, a stark reminder of the cost of war. A soldier shouted that the great army and the cavalry had arrived. A wave of relief washed over the troops as they saw their comrades charging onto the battlefield. Panic spread as the soldier yelled that the Tang troops were closing in fast. He ordered everyone to board the ships as quickly as possible. They needed to move like their feet were on fire if they wanted to escape. The ships sailed away from the beach, carrying the last remnants of the army. Every second counted, and the soldiers knew it. 2 soldiers stood guard on the deck, their eyes scanning the horizon. They knew the Tang troops wouldn't give up easily, so they had to stay alert. The fleet sailed onward, the setting sun casting long shadows across the water. Where they were going, no one knew, but they had to trust that it was better than what they were leaving behind. Despite all the chaos, the man held the sleeping baby close. He looked down at the child with a mix of worry and determination. He would do everything in his power to protect the young emperor. One of the armored soldiers asked what name His Majesty Yeolja gave the young emperor. The other soldier replied that His Majesty Yeolja named him Ulje. The first soldier acknowledged this and then asked what His Majesty's next command would be. The commander of the guards looked around urgently. He demanded to know where His Majesty was. Another soldier approached, holding out a scroll. He announced that His Majesty gave this to be delivered. The message read that His Majesty gave his final command to his younger brother. He was to take the child and the remaining survivors and go far, far away to live a peaceful life. The soldiers stood on the deck, gazing out at the horizon. They were sailing away, carrying out His Majesty's last command. Where they were going, no one knew, but they had to believe it was for the best. The text explained the meaning. This was an elder brother's last request to his younger kin. Wu Hyung was a humble term an older brother used when speaking to a younger brother. The soldier clenched the scroll, his expression hardening. He thought bitterly about how the man he could never bring himself to call brother now used that title to order him to flee. The soldier looked up at the commander, his face etched with worry. He asked what would become of Pyongyang Fortress now that they were retreating. Another soldier fell to his knees, begging the commander to kill him. The commander stared ahead, his face unreadable. A single drop of blood trickled down his cheek, a silent testament to the agony he felt at having to abandon their home. The commander stood tall, his armor gleaming in the dim light. Before him, a soldier knelt, head bowed in defeat. The commander stared down at the blood-stained scroll, the last orders he'd received. A fallen soldier lay nearby, a grim reminder of the cost of their retreat. The commander's face was etched with sorrow as he looked towards the burning city. He thought to himself that after 900 years of Gari, he couldn't protect them. The ship was caught in a raging storm, the waves crashing over the deck. It looked like they were about to be swallowed by the sea. The young emperor cried out, terrified by the storm. The ship rocked violently, threatening to throw him overboard. The ship fought against the storm, each wave threatening to swallow it whole. Many other ships struggled nearby, caught in the same watery hell. The storm's fury intensified as lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the ships below. The waves crashed down on them, threatening to drag them under. A massive wave crashed over the ship, sending it reeling. It felt like the ship was about to be torn apart. The ship was completely surrounded by the raging storm. It was all alone. The soldiers fought to keep their footing on the deck, grabbing for anything to hold on to. Desperate shouts rang out. Grab the rope! Get a grip, man! You trying to die? Tie the rope around your waist! The ship fought against the waves, tossed around like a toy. Someone yelled, ordering the helmsman to move it and not drift. One of the men looked up, shouting for the general. He needed to know what was happening. The general declared that they needed to turn the ship around. The order was given with urgency. The man looked absolutely terrified. He said he'd spent his whole life on the sea, but had never seen waves like this before. It was a massive wall of water that threatened to swallow them whole. The general yelled, ordering them to quickly turn the ship. The storm raged around them, making it almost impossible to hear anything. Nearby, someone watched the baby. The child seemed completely unaware of the danger, smiling innocently. One of the soldiers shouted that there was no way to turn back. They were completely cut off. The general screamed at the top of his lungs, ordering them to push through the massive waves. His voice was full of desperation. Another soldier raised his sword, declaring that this was His Majesty Yolja's will and the battle of the Gari Navy. He looked absolutely determined. The soldier stood firm against the storm, raising his sword high. Lightning crackled around the blade, but he didn't flinch, his eyes fixed on the raging waves ahead. The order to break through the dark echoed across the ship. The fleet was tossed about like toys in a bathtub, each ship fighting its own battle against the monstrous waves. The storm seemed determined to swallow them whole, and the air was thick with the roar of the wind and the crash of the sea. On deck, the soldiers clung to anything they could find, their faces grim but resolute. The wind howled around them, and the rain lashed down like whips, but they stood their ground, ready to obey the general's command. The water churned and foamed, a swirling mass of chaos that threatened to pull the ships under. Each wave was like a mountain crashing down, testing the strength of the vessels and the courage of the men aboard. The ships were caught in a maelstrom of wind and water, tossed about like toys. Waterspouts danced across the surface of the sea, each one a swirling tower of destruction. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted from the heart of the storm, washing over everything. It felt like the world itself was being torn apart. Someone called out to the young emperor, their voice barely audible over the storm. The general gripped his sword tightly, his knuckles white. He stood firm against the storm, a beacon of defiance in the face of nature's fury. The general grunted, his gaze softening as he looked down at the young emperor in his arms, who remained mercifully unaware of the danger surrounding them. The man carefully held the wrapped item in his arms, protecting it from harm. Whatever it was clearly important. The man looked around, confused. He wondered what had happened and why the mainland was still far away. The typhoon was gone, and it had gotten quiet all of a sudden. The man demanded that the others dock the ship if they saw land. He asked why they were staring like they had an arrow in their head, wondering what they were looking at. The man looked over at the land. He remarked on the nice view, but then noticed how huge the land was. No matter which way he turned, there was land. The man stared out at the strange landscape. He didn't know what to make of it. The man wondered when the sea had gotten so narrow. It didn't make any sense. The crew started to panic. One of them asked if they were in a lake, questioning the captain's sanity. Baru was told to calm down, but we couldn't believe the captain's actions. The great envoy asked what they should do. They realized this was clearly a lake, and they had set out from the open sea. Whatever had happened, they must be far from where they began, which meant the place was safe. The captain ordered the fleet to land. It was time to see where they had ended up. The troops began to land on the shore. It was time to find out what this new land held for them. The captain stared out at the new shoreline. He had no idea where they were. He wondered aloud where in the world they had ended up. The fleet had landed, and the troops were setting up camp along the shoreline. This new land was completely unknown to them, and the air felt different from anything they had ever experienced. Buru and Uru stepped forward, barking orders. They commanded the soldiers to scout the surroundings, preparing for anything. The troops responded immediately, ready to follow their instructions. The order was given to prepare for a possible ambush, and the soldiers moved quickly to form battle lines around their location. They understood the need for caution in this unknown territory. The captain of the guards received his orders. Report the current personnel count immediately. He understood the importance of knowing their numbers in this new, uncertain world. The troops stood in formation, ready for anything. They were an army, stranded in a strange land, but they were still a force to be reckoned with. The tension in the air was thick with anticipation. Delete entire panel. The baby cried out loudly. Someone addressed him. Your Highness, don't call me that. After a pause. Understood. Then I'll just step aside for a moment. Someone asks, what's the matter? It seems you saw Sophie. Is that so? The three men stood around the baby, looking down at it. They seemed unsure of what to do next, their faces showing a mix of concern and curiosity. The man stared intently, his eyes narrowed with determination. He demanded that something be changed immediately, his expression leaving no room for argument. The three men looked down at the baby again, their faces now etched with worry. They seemed to realize the gravity of the situation, their concern growing with each passing moment. The man's voice boomed across the area, his face contorted with urgency. He shouted for someone to call the captain of the guards, his command echoing through the air. The man's voice was hoarse as he called out for the captain. He desperately needed the captain's leadership, his shout carrying a sense of urgency and desperation. The soldiers moved through the forest, their steps carefully planned. From above, their formation looked like a well-oiled machine, ready to strike at any moment. One soldier said they only needed one wild boar from Gojo Mountain, but then immediately contradicted himself, pointing out there wasn't even a single ant in sight. He then scolded someone else as a little brat for being rude to an elder. A soldier questioned why it was suddenly final again. He emphasized there was a huge difference at Gojo, saying that even if they came from the same batch, the one that came first. He then asked if someone had just heard that. One of the soldiers, wielding a large axe, ordered everyone to stay alert. His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. The others tensed, ready for whatever might come next. The soldiers advanced cautiously, their swords drawn and ready. The forest was silent around them, but the tension was thick in the air. They knew something was coming. The soldiers paused, listening intently to the sounds of the forest. One of them grinned, declaring that the noise meant they'd be having boar monster meat for dinner tonight. The sounds grew louder as the soldiers advanced deeper into the forest. They moved with caution, their weapons ready as they stalked their prey. The soldier barked an order, telling everyone to keep their eyes peeled. The others tensed, their grip tightening on their weapons. They questioned whether the pigs in this area walked on 2 legs. More importantly, they asked why those pigs were so blue. The soldier looked closely at the approaching figures. He asked if the others had noticed that they looked like they were all bruised. One of them shrugged, saying that the fact they walked on 2 legs and were blue didn't matter at all. He declared that as long as goju tasted good, that's all that mattered. The soldiers stood their ground, their boots planted firmly on the forest floor. The air crackled with tension as they waited for the creatures to approach. The soldiers grinned, looking down at the group of goblins. The goblins looked up at them with wide eyes, clearly scared. The soldiers were ready for a fight. With a burst of speed, the soldiers leaped into the air, closing the distance between them and the goblins in an instant. The goblins didn't even have time to react before the soldiers were upon them. The soldiers' scream echoed through the forest, a desperate cry for help, but the sound was abruptly cut short as a group of orcs appeared, their faces grim. The woman gasped for air, her chest heaving with each shallow breath. She was clearly struggling to keep it together as the situation spiraled out of control. A soldier yelled out, his voice filled with desperation. He was calling for the ambassador, hoping he could do something to help. The man stood his ground, his body tense and ready for a fight. He would protect the others, no matter what it took. Someone addressed the captain of the guards, their voice filled with concern. They reported that the child had changed, and no one could explain why. The man looked down, lost in thought. Meanwhile, in a room adorned with banners, the captain of the guards knelt before another man, a young girl standing nearby. The man's eyes widened as he looked at the scroll in his hands. Turns out, it was another letter from His Majesty Yahello, with instructions to deliver it once they reached their destination. The man with the sword asked if there were 2 letters. The captain of the guards apologized and confirmed that was correct. She was the daughter of Yul Rayuhwan, the captain of the guards, who stayed behind to protect me. The letter continued, explaining that was why I sent her to you. I apologize for deceiving you. The fortress was falling, engulfed in flames. It couldn't be helped. Someone had to make the call. Otherwise, everyone would have thrown their lives away trying to defend the indefensible. Though born of the emperor's bloodline, he didn't want to put someone like you, who has spent your life on the battlefield, through such cruelty. He wanted to reassure the man. He told him to not blame himself for failing to protect the country. It wasn't his fault. As I, who rose to the throne of Yahello, through a coup, Yahello admitted that his life was lived as a mere puppet of power. He had never truly been in control. He begged Yahello to let the ambassador live differently and to carry out everything according to his own will. Yahello's face was cold and unyielding. Then, a spray of blood filled the air. Yahello looked down at the bloodied sword in his hand. He then said he hoped that child would grow up well and become his partner. The ambassador stood tall, facing away from the horror he had just witnessed. He spoke softly, saying that His Majesty would grant him freedom. The guards moved in, surrounding the ambassador. They led him away, leaving Yahello alone with his thoughts. The man carefully held the baby in his arms, supporting its tiny head. His large hand gently touched the baby's cheek, a soft and caring gesture. The baby stared up with wide eyes, its face full of curiosity. The man watched the baby, his expression unreadable. The baby suddenly broke into a wide, toothless grin. The man's eyes softened as he looked at the baby's happy face. Someone asked the man to change the baby's diaper. He responded with a simple acknowledgement, ready to take on the task. He explained that she had stayed behind to protect the castle, following her husband, Ful Ryuhwan. The man stood there, looking up at the sky. He wondered what he had to do now, what his next move should be. He thought back to when he first picked up a sword at 6 years old. By 16, he was already on the battlefield, ready to fight. He remembered when they abandoned their homeland and fled. He was at the very front, fighting to protect everyone. As someone born from the emperor's bloodline, even if he was a bastard, his duty was clear. He had to protect the empire, no matter what it took. But now, standing on this strange shore, the reason for his existence seemed to have vanished. What was he supposed to do now? He stared up into the sky, the colors shifting above him. What then should he draw his sword for? What was his purpose here? Inside the tent, a scout reported on the surroundings. He had scouted the forest near Gojo, but found no enemies. The scout reported that the atmosphere of the forest was different from Dong or Sila. Some of the trees looked a bit different too. But the strangest thing was the creatures walking on two legs. The general looked absolutely furious. He demanded to know what the meaning of the interruption was. Had an enemy appeared? The soldier stammered, his eyes wide with fear. It seemed heaven was angered. What? Heaven was angered? The soldier hesitated, unsure of what to say. He looked up at the sky, trying to find the right words to describe what he was seeing. The soldier finally spoke, pointing up at the sky. He said that the moon had given birth, and the offspring were twins. He looked at the others with a strange expression. The soldier looked up at the sky in disbelief. He pointed out that the moon wasn't giving birth, and the stars were different too. It was like they were in a completely different world. The other man listened carefully, taking in the bizarre news. The officer tried to remain calm, saying that at least they didn't have to worry about the Tang army right now. The other soldier agreed, but his face showed he wasn't convinced. The officer repeated himself as if to convince himself. Delete entire description. The S name was displayed. Delete entire description. The orcs charged, weapons raised, ready to attack. One of them yelled at the pig, demanding to know where it thought it was going, and triumphantly announced that he had caught the blue pig. A man stood firm, his expression stern. He commanded the pig to hold still, his voice filled with authority. The man frowned, deep in thought. He wondered if the pigs here walked on two legs naturally, or if they were actually people wearing pig masks. The orcs continued their assault on the pig, swinging their weapons wildly. The pig, surprisingly, kept repeating, "Let's talk human," over and over. One of the men commented that the pigs sounded like they were talking like people. The other man looked at him strangely, asking what he was talking about and if he had ever seen a pig talk. The first man paused, then admitted that was true. The man tickled the orc relentlessly, telling him to hurry up and just die already. The orc screamed from the tickling, squirming in the man's grasp, desperate for it to stop. The man continued to beat on the orc, unimpressed by the screaming. He found the whole thing pretty noisy, actually, like the orc was doing it on purpose to annoy him. One of the men wondered what was going on. The other man replied that they were performing some kind of ritual, though what kind, he didn't know. Woo! And another man continued to beat the pig. One of them wondered why they were tickling it, suggesting a smiling sacrifice would be better. He then told URU to tickle him properly, because they had to keep him smiling. Great Lion told BURU and URU to stop what they were doing. BURU asked why he was interrupting them. Great Lion said they could do the ritual later, because they needed food first. The man with the axe was told that since the pig was blue, it might be sick. Suddenly, a voice called out. The general sighed, asking what it was this time. Had a dog or a cow started walking on two legs? He then asked how they even knew about it. Everyone stared in stunned silence. The air crackled with tension as they tried to process what they were seeing. Anyway, back to the action. The order was given to grab weapons. One of the soldiers asked what that thing was. He wondered how a cow could walk on two legs. The command to block them echoed through the ranks. The soldiers braced themselves, raising their shields to form a wall against the incoming threat. The creature charged forward, its massive frame eating up the distance. The order to throw was barked out. Instantly, a volley of spears flew through the air, aimed at the charging creature. The fight raged on, a chaotic dance of steel and fury. But for a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. The spears found their mark, piercing the creature's thick hide. Fury twisted his face as he watched the battle unfold. The battlefield was a chaotic mess of soldiers and strange creatures, locked in a deadly struggle. The horned creature was caught in a brutal assault. Steel flashed as the soldiers pressed their attack, their weapons finding their mark. The fight went on. The man yelled, confused by the situation. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He shouted at the soldiers to shoot their arrows at the cow, demanding to know what they were all doing. Arrows flew, piercing the creature's hide. The impact of the arrows caused the beast to stumble back, roaring in pain. The man looked closely at the rope. His eyes narrowed in suspicion. He wondered if someone was trying to start a power struggle with him. The man didn't hesitate. He yelled for the soldiers to fire. The rope weapon shot forward with deadly speed. The arrows rained down on the horned creature, each one finding its mark. The force of the arrows caused the beast to stagger. The horned creature knelt on the ground, defeated. Arrows stuck out from its body, a testament to the soldier's deadly aim. The man screamed at the cow-like creature, calling it a bastard and commanding it to die. He watched as the creature fell, finally defeated. The horned creature lay lifeless on the ground, a pool of blood spreading around it. The arrows that had struck it were now still, marking the end of the fight. The man stood over the fallen beast, his large axe dripping with blood. He had won, but the fight had clearly taken its toll. The silence hung heavy in the air. URU asked if it was okay to eat the cow bastard. He added that the great lion wouldn't tell them not to eat it again, right? The man was shocked. There were 3 more of those creatures, and now there was even a dog running around. The battle was a mess of blood and steel. Creatures and warriors clashed, each blow carrying the weight of desperation. The ground was littered with bodies. Someone called out to URU, suggesting they split up and take them out half and half. Then they wondered who would get the last one. The other man shrugged and replied, "Who knows?" A warrior's sword flashed, cutting through one of the creatures with ease. The impact echoed through the air. The battle raged on, a chaotic dance of death. Each warrior fought with everything they had, their faces grim with determination. The Minotaur roared, ready to charge. The warrior stood his ground, his sword gleaming in the dim light. He wasn't going to back down from this fight. The warrior's sword flashed, slicing across the Minotaur's chest. Dark blood sprayed into the air as the beast staggered back, roaring in pain. The warrior didn't let up. The warrior looked up, his face etched with concern. Something wasn't right. He could feel it in the air. Another warrior struck a creature hard, his fist connecting with a sickening thud. The force of the blow sent the monster stumbling back. He wasn't messing around. The warrior plunged his sword deep into the monster's back. The creature let out a final, guttural cry as it collapsed to the ground. The fight was far from over, but this one was done. The warrior didn't waste any time. He swung his sword with incredible speed, slicing right through the Minotaur's chest. Blood sprayed everywhere as the beast roared in pain. The Minotaur crashed to the ground, defeated. The warrior stood over the fallen beast, panting slightly. The battle had been fierce, but he had come out on top. The rest of the warriors arrived, surveying the scene. The ground was littered with the bodies of Minotaurs and horses, a testament to the battle that had just taken place. They had won, but at a cost. One of the warriors spoke up, explaining the strange sensation. He said that the gravity here was weak, which is why their armor, weapons, and even their own bodies felt lighter than usual. The other warrior listened intently, processing the information. So that's why, he thought. It all made sense now. This new world was full of surprises. The warrior didn't hesitate. He swung his sword down, slicing the Minotaur from shoulder to waist. Blood splattered as the beast roared in pain. The ground shook violently as the massive Minotaur crashed down. Dust and debris flew everywhere as the earth cracked under the weight. The Minotaur looked down at its chest, confused. How could he have lost so easily? He didn't understand what was happening. The warrior calmly sheathed his sword, the metal sliding smoothly into the scabbard. Blood dripped from the blade, a testament to his victory. The warrior gripped the hilt of his sword, a smirk playing on his lips. He thought to himself that those Tang bastards wouldn't stand a chance against him right now. What a shame. The soldier didn't hesitate. He drove his blade into the werewolf, piercing its chest. The creature screamed in pain, blood spurting from the wound. The remaining werewolves charged forward, their claws bared and teeth snapping. The soldiers braced themselves, knowing they were outnumbered and outmatched. The air filled with the sounds of battle. The leader ordered Buru to chase down the remaining enemies and wipe them out. He also told him to expand the search area and find out what else was out there. Buru simply replied that he understood. The forest stretched out before them, a sea of green that seemed to go on forever. The trees were tall and thick, their branches intertwined to create a canopy that blocked out the sun. It was a place of mystery and danger. The man yelled for Sarah to get the village. He then called out for Mr. Varen. Something was definitely wrong, and they needed to act fast. The man yelled for them to hurry. Below, the woman looked terrified, tears streaming down her face, clearly in a panic. The man notched an arrow, pulling back the string with practiced ease. He scanned the forest, his eyes narrowed in concentration as he prepared for whatever was coming. He spotted the ogre in the distance, its massive form lumbering through the trees. The hunter knew he had to act fast if he wanted to protect the woman. The hunter yelled at the ogre, calling it a stupid ogre and daring it to come closer. He was trying to draw its attention away from the woman. The ogre roared in pain, the arrow sticking out of its shoulder. It looked absolutely furious. He called out desperately to someone, his words trailing off. The world seemed to hold its breath for a moment. Time stood still. Sarah tripped and fell hard, sprawling onto the forest floor. The ground rushed up to meet her face. The man yelled at the ogre, cursing it and daring it to come eat him instead. Sarah screamed, "No!" a sound of pure terror. He grabbed Sarah and ran as fast as he could through the trees. He had to get get her away from whatever was out there. He looked at something in the distance. What's that thing? It's bigger than a cow, he said, alarmed. Sarah started to regain consciousness, making confused sounds. Huh? W, she mumbled weakly. A dwarf appeared before them. You were in danger, young lady, the dwarf said to Sarah. The man stared in shock. A dwarf? He exclaimed. The dwarf stammered, barely able to speak. Eminai, that was close. Eminai looked at him in disbelief. Dwarf? Eminai gave the dwarf a strange look, clearly confused. Dwarf? What's that supposed to mean? Suddenly, a voice shouted a warning. The dwarf looked up, startled. The ground shook as something massive crashed down. Dirt and rocks flew everywhere from the impact. Back in the forest, the dwarf continued to carry EMI-NAI, looking around cautiously. The girl's eyes widened in horror as she looked down at the body. Reflected in her pupils, she saw the figure responsible for the brutal attack. The attacker swung down with incredible force, the blade slicing through the body. A spray of blood and gore filled the air as the body split apart. The man and the girl stood frozen, their faces etched with disbelief. The scene before them was a gruesome display of power. The man yelled in disbelief as he watched the ogre fall. It was unbelievable. The ogre went down in one hit. The man stood over the fallen ogre, breathing heavily. The air was thick with the smell of blood and death. The story continues. Someone observed that it must be high order, EMINNAI, commenting that it wasn't bad. BRU spoke in what seemed like another language. Great Rune, BRU, Nalere, Irene, BRU, which was translated as asking for forgiveness and thanking the Earth Clan. Back at the camp, soldiers were moving around. Someone told Soraya not to worry. Soraya told her uncle that she was too hurt to move. She insisted that he escape and warned the village. The uncle refused to leave her alone. He told her to stop babbling. The uncle told Soraya to speak so he could understand her. He tried to reassure her, saying that if an orc bites you, but you keep your wits, you survive, right? He was clearly trying to stay positive. Someone noticed a woman with golden hair. Her skin was so pale, it was almost unreal. He wondered if all the locals were this gorgeous, and if this was the West. The man doubted that the people were punitive force soldiers. He reasoned that there were no black hair, black eye troops in the kingdom. He was trying to figure out who they were. Ji Woong Sam told someone to beat it, clearly annoyed by their staring. He looked absolutely furious. The camp was a hive of activity, soldiers running in every direction. It seemed like something big was about to happen. Ji Woong Sam tried to communicate with the locals. Locals, I guess. Guiltio, can you understand us? He asked, trying to figure out if they could communicate. Guiltio replied that High Order had told them his name, but he couldn't grasp anything else they were saying. The group waited, watching Ji Woong Sam try to make sense of the situation. They needed to figure out where they were and how to get back home. He realized that they didn't know exactly where they were. He shouted to the soldiers. Besides the walking pigs and cows, the man realized that to get any useful information, they needed to find a way to talk to the people who lived here. Without words, they were lost. The group sat there, thinking, but one of them said they'd figure something out. Somehow, they had to. Suddenly, one of the men shouted that he had an idea. He grinned, looking confident. The lad with them was a genius who knew every tongue. One of the men declared that Ji Woong Sam should speak for them. He explained that this was Ji Woong Sam, addressing someone with respect. Ji Woong Sam was introduced as the man who knew every language under heaven. It was a bold claim, but he looked confident. Someone asked if that was really true. Another man affirmed it, explaining that Ji Woong Sam had traveled west with his merchant parents and picked up every foreign tongue along the way. Someone suggested they try talking to the locals. The group agreed enthusiastically, ready to let Ji Woong Sam put his skills to the test. Ji Woong Sam thought to himself that this was his chance to finally prove his worth to the group. Ji Woong Sam declared that he had traveled everywhere, from Great Jin to Wa Koku. He boasted that there was no place he hadn't been, and no language he didn't know. Ji Woong Sam tried to greet the blonde woman, attempting to speak French, but it didn't go well, and he quickly stopped himself, realizing it wasn't working. Ji Woong Sam realized that French wasn't the right choice. He admitted that it was a no-go, while the blonde woman looked even more puzzled. Ji Woong Sam tried again, this time attempting English. He greeted her with a drawn-out hello, but she still didn't understand. Ji Woong Sam, not giving up, suggested a cheek-to-cheek greeting. He moved in close, but the blonde woman looked completely shocked, unsure how to react. The blonde woman watched the man with the ponytail and wondered what he was doing. The others just stood there silently, also unsure unsure of what was happening. The man with the ponytail suddenly looked scared. The other man looked absolutely furious. Wung Sam tried speaking in different languages, hoping one would work. He tried Spanish, French, Arabic, German, and even some kind of tribal dialect. Someone laughed nervously and addressed the envoy, saying, "Here's the thing. They seemed to be trying to explain or excuse what was happening." Someone sighed and said they forgot URL was useless outside of battle. They warned URL not to claim he wrote the ulji in front of people, calling it embarrassing. Delete, verify, or remove missing OCR data. One of the women stepped forward, a determined look on her face. She offered to try something, though it wasn't clear what she had in mind. She stated her name, Yeon Chuaga Ram, slowly said his name, Yeon H-B-I-G-A Ram. The woman seemed surprised and asked if his name was Yeon Shuai Ram. Yeon Shui Ga Ram, then asked the woman for her name. She paused for a moment before answering simply, Sarah. The crowd murmured amongst themselves, finally understanding that her name was Sarah. Yeon Shui Ga Ram looked absolutely pissed. He realized that was all it took, and he already knew her name. He was frustrated, muttering that he had even called her name twice before. Someone was talking to BRU, thanking him and commenting on his good memory. The speaker was laughing heartily, clearly in high spirits. One of the men dismissed BRU's behavior, saying he was just talking nonsense and that they should let him have his fun. He suggested they call it a day. The man interrupted, saying he still had something to take care of. He looked determined. Night had fallen over the military camp, casting long shadows across the tents. The air was still, but the camp was bustling with activity. Inside one of the tents, two men sat at a table, the only light coming from a flickering candle. The atmosphere was tense, as if they were discussing something important. Baron Alvin sat at his table, calmly eating his food. He seemed unfazed by the chaos around him, already planning his next move. Night, Yuk Lion Teluman stood nearby, his armor gleaming in the dim light. He watched the Baron with a stern expression, ready to carry out whatever orders came his way. He reported that the mercenary band would soon seize the farming village, and referred to those fleeing the kingdom as vermin. He declared that he would make them pay for that. The military encampment bustled with activity, soldiers moving about their duties. Tents dotted the landscape, a testament to the organized chaos of a camp preparing for movement. One of the men asked if they were leaving the next day. The other, addressed as General, confirmed that they were. The general explained that, strangely, Sarah was following Blue and Yu. A man's voice called out, announcing that he was there and telling someone to come in. Someone said purity, simplicity, aha, as the realization seemed to dawn on them. Someone instructed them to go to the village. Sarah said she understood. The speaker refused to let her go alone. He told Sarah that Demudiok. Sarah asked why all of a sudden, since Yu needs to organize information about that place. Faran Sarah responded enthusiastically to Gojo's earlier comment, exclaiming about its deep meaning. She acknowledged that she thought Gojo didn't trust her, then laughed it off. Gojo thought to himself that he couldn't trust Sarah at all, except in combat. The travelers moved through the night, the landscape stretching out before them. The stars shone brightly above, guiding them on their way. The logo of Vortex appeared, a reminder of the source. The captain of the guards, Daimudeoke, explained that he had a mountain of work to do at the camp. He told Sarah and Wu to go and come back safely this time, reassuring them not to worry. The Vortex logo appeared, a reminder of where I was seeing all this. The orcs marched forward, pushing a cart loaded with supplies. The only sound was the rhythmic thud of their feet on the ground. The Vortex logo appeared once more. One of the soldiers pointed into the distance and shouted, "I can see the village over there." "Everyone stop," someone shouted. "Hey, liar." The soldiers tensed, ready for anything. The man questioned if his harsh training was just a bonus, wondering if they even learned to speak in 10 days. He looked absolutely furious. The man riding the horse groaned, clearly annoyed. The other man shouted that they should stop talking and just ask if that was the right village, making sure his order was understood. The soldiers rode on, a tense silence hanging in the air. They were getting closer to the village, and everyone was on edge. Sam said that the villagers might be surprised, so Sarah and he would go first to explain the situation. He thanked Buru. A duck quacked nearby. Buru looked absolutely furious, his face contorted with rage. He swung his axe down at the man on the horse, shouting, asking if he thought he was equal to him and where he got off talking like that. Buru suddenly realized he was about to thank the guy, but he was still pissed that the guy used casual speech, calling him a little punk for it. Someone told Buru to stop, saying he was scaring the kid. Sarah didn't even seem surprised by his outburst. The man on the ground had a creepy smile on his face. He seemed to be enjoying the chaos. Buru came to the conclusion that saying thank you scares people. He figured he needed to warn the villagers about that first thing when they arrived. The village entrance was completely empty, not a soul in sight. An eerie quiet hung in the air, broken only by the gentle breeze. The man and woman walked into the village, looking around in confusion. The man wondered out loud where everyone had gone. Someone pointed towards the main square, urging them to hurry. There was a sense of urgency in their gesture, as if something important was happening there. They made their way to the village square, the buildings around them casting long shadows. The air was thick with anticipation, a feeling that something was about to happen. The man suddenly put a finger to the woman's lips, silencing her. He looked around cautiously, as if afraid of being overheard. The village chief looked up at Captain Miorin, demanding an explanation. He couldn't understand why Miorin hadn't stopped the orc horde, especially after promising to do so in exchange for food and money. A group of armed men stood behind Miorin, watching the scene unfold. The man leaned in close to the village chief, a sneer on his face. He wondered if the village chief was just naive because he was a farmer, or if he was simply too old and dull to understand what was happening. The man wrapped an arm around the village chief, his voice dripping with false concern. He explained that risking their lives to fight orcs wasn't worth it when they could make easy money by capturing everyone in the village. He chuckled at the thought. The man's expression hardened as he turned to his men, issuing orders. He told them not to injure the women and to avoid crippling the men, emphasizing the importance of their commodity value. The man's voice was cold and ruthless as he gave the final command. He ordered his men to kill anyone without commodity value. A group of villagers screamed as the mercenaries attacked, their cries echoing through the village square. The villagers screamed and begged for their lives as the mercenaries swarmed them. They cried out to their fathers, hoping someone would save them from this nightmare. A mother held her baby tight, tears streaming down her face. She begged the man to at least spare her child, clinging to the hope that some shred of decency remained. The man sneered down at her, his eyes cold. He told her it all depended on what she did. His words like a slap in the face. Without a second thought, the man kicked the woman. She went crashing to the ground, still desperately trying to shield her baby from the violence. A man screamed at the mercenary, calling him a bastard, but the mercenary didn't even flinch, continuing to kick the person on the ground with brutal force. The mercenary grinned, his teeth bared. He asked the village chief if living as a slave wasn't better than being eaten alive by orcs, his words dripping with sarcasm. All around, the villagers were getting beaten to the ground, their faces contorted in pain as the mercenaries kicked and punched them without mercy. The village chief, lying on the ground, lamented their decision to flee the kingdom's tyranny. He realized it was a mistake to trust people so easily, his voice filled with regret. He weakly warned Varen and Sarah to never come to this place. His words were a desperate plea, hoping to protect them from the horrors he was now facing. The village chief closed his eyes, wishing that at least those two would be safe from harm. His body was battered, but his spirit still held on to a flicker of hope. The village chief urged Sarah to quickly go and inform others about what was happening. He then turned to the unknown man and asked what he was going to do. The man said he would buy as much time as he could until they arrived. The man's face was grim as he thought about the upcoming fight. He knew he had to hold out as long as possible. He had to buy as much time as he could. Sarah looked surprised, clearly worried about what he was planning to do. She didn't want to leave him behind to face whatever was coming. She started to say something, but hesitated. Suddenly, a creepy voice echoed through the village. A man with a sinister smile appeared, his eyes gleaming with malice. He asked if there were little mice around, his words dripping with a disturbing undertone. The two people lay on the ground, defeated. One of them was bleeding, his face a mask of pain. One of the men reported to Captain that they had found her behind the barracks. He told him to deal with it. The injured woman remained on the ground, helpless. The man with the sinister smile grabbed the woman. He told her to come with him, his voice dripping with malice. The woman screamed, terrified. Suddenly, a man kicked the attacker, yelling at him to get out of the way. The kick sent the attacker flying. He grunted in pain. The attacker screamed as he was sent flying by the kick. The woman continued to scream, still terrified by what was happening. The force of the kick echoed through the air. The woman watched the man who had grabbed her. She had been terrified only moments before. Now, she looked down at him as he lay on the ground, defeated. The next moment, the man looked up, his face a mask of shock. He exclaimed something. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. A heavily armored dwarf rode towards them on horseback. He looked like a force to be reckoned with. The man wondered. The dwarf rode confidently through the chaos. He seemed unfazed by the carnage around him. Someone shouted something something. The sound of hooves echoed through the village as a dwarf rode into town on horseback. People turned to see what was happening. The man, who was captain, asked Eminai if she was okay. He told her that this place was dangerous and that she should take Baron and get out of here. EM-NA. I looked worried. Suddenly, someone shouted for everyone to brace themselves. It looked like something bad was about to happen. The men looked up, their faces etched with confusion. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. A spear was pointed straight at them. The attack was about to begin. The commander roared, ordering his troops to beat the old guys and treat them like animals. He yelled that if they're armed, they should finish them off. Above, a warrior swung his sword down on someone. Suddenly, the cavalry charged forward, a wave of mounted soldiers thundering across the field. The ground shook as they rode. Fear gripped the villagers as they recognized the approaching force. Someone shouted that it was a dwarf, the extermination troops. He wondered what was happening as they came closer. Above, the dwarf fought. The attacker swung his sword, catching his target off guard. The strike sent the man flying. The battle turned brutal as the attackers showed no mercy. Someone yelled to kill them all. The villagers screamed, begging for their lives. The soldier couldn't believe his eyes. He wondered if the kingdom had sent a night order. He was shocked, saying that the extermination force couldn't have gone this far. He stammered, stating that 2 armies was impossible, as he had never seen knights like those. He'd never heard of such a knightly order in the kingdom or on the continent, wondering what on earth was going on. The soldier yelled, telling the captain to make for the region quickly, but suddenly he was struck by a volley of arrows. He realized it was the crossbow of the world, the quarrel crossbolt, as he fell from his horse. The soldier pointed up, wondering where on earth those were coming from. He screamed as he was hit, yelling to the captain to look over there. The captain was shocked, saying that this couldn't be. He saw the archer cavalry, realizing that the arrows flying range where all archers aim quarrels. Wouldn't that? The captain cursed, realizing that if they wanted to live, they had to get out of here. He ordered them to fall back to the back gate and abandon the slaves. He yelled at someone running off, demanding to know where they thought they were going. The cavalry charged forward, trampling over the fallen. The ground was littered with bodies, but they didn't slow down for a second. The man swung his hammer with furious speed. He screamed at the fleeing soldiers, demanding to know where they thought they were going, ordering them to kill the enemy. JJALTUNG's face twisted in rage. He was furious that someone had called him shorty, his least favorite word, and screamed at the offender to shut up. The cavalry thundered onward, their horses' hooves pounding the earth. A voice roared above the chaos, ordering them to kill the enemy without mercy. The attacker's fist connected with brutal force. The impact sent shockwaves through the victim, leaving no doubt about the attacker's intent. The soldiers ran as fast as they could, trying to get away. The leader watched them go, his face showing how surprised he was. The man screamed, warning that a dwarf was coming. Above him, the dwarf fell from the sky, crashing down. The dwarf's sword came down, stabbing right through one of the soldiers. The attack was quick and deadly. The man yelled at his troops, ordering them to do whatever it took to stop the dwarf. The dwarf was a major problem. The man with the axe watched the soldiers run, saying that they were doing a good job at running away fast, even better than regular soldiers. He thought it was ridiculous. Knights rode forward on their horses, their swords ready. They were getting ready to fight. The leader ordered his troops to take out the brats up front. He looked absolutely furious. The soldiers fought with everything they had, their swords meeting with deadly force. Blood splattered everywhere. The man told his troops not to waste time on those who were running away. He said there was an URU nearby that they needed to capture. The men picked up the pace on their horses, rushing to report what they'd seen. They had to tell Baron Alvin right away. Arrows rained down on the trench, finding their marks with deadly accuracy. The archers showed no mercy, their arrows piercing through flesh and bone. The kick landed with a sickening thud, sending the man sprawling to the ground. He landed hard, the air knocked out of him. He lay motionless on the ground, several arrows sticking out of his body. Blood seeped from the wounds, staining the earth around him. Another arrow was drawn back, the archer's hand steady and firm. He aimed carefully, preparing to unleash another deadly shot. The man's eyes widened in terror. He screamed, pointing with a shaking hand. Below, the archer remained focused, his arrow aimed and ready. The archer readied his arrow, his eyes focused on the target, but the man told him to turn back, his voice laced with urgency. The village was quiet. The village was a scene of death. Bodies littered the ground, a testament to the brutal attack. The villagers cried out in despair, huddling around their dead. They begged for mercy, their voices filled with terror. They knew that the most dangerous creature of all was man. But then, a voice cut through the despair, urging everyone to calm down. Someone announced that these people had come to help them. The villagers looked at Baron, asking if it was true. They thought that these people were soldiers from the extermination force, and that they were saved. One of the men yelled at someone to get an interpreter and relay what the envoy was saying properly. He seemed really angry about it. He was pacing back and forth, and his face was red. Baru was told that they would talk later. One of the men with him asked if he saw something over there, but the other man said he didn't see anything. They were squinting, trying to see in the distance. The men were staring off into the distance, trying to make out what they were seeing. One of them exclaimed that he knew what they were looking at. He looked shocked by it. The blue orcs were coming. They were screaming and yelling as they charged forward. The villagers were scared, and they started running in the opposite direction. A man rode fast on horseback, kicking up dust. He shouted, laughing like he had already won. The man looked down, his face grim. He seemed troubled by something he had seen. The man yelled that he had to tell the great lord what was happening. In the background, some orcs were running and screaming. Under the dark sky, a man walked through the forest. The trees loomed over him, and the air was cold. A horde of orcs was charging forward, screaming. But then, a man yelled at the top of his lungs, calling someone a liar. The man ordered everyone to gather up every able-bodied man with a bow. The soldiers responded, yelling. Far away, the horde of orcs advanced, grunting and snarling as they moved through the forest. Their numbers seemed endless. The air grew heavy with anticipation. Everyone knew what was coming. One of the archers looked at his bow with confusion. He wondered what he was supposed to shoot with, since it wasn't a wooden bow. The man yelled, calling someone a liar. He ordered them to signal their white-haired friends when he gave the signal. He then demanded to know how many arrows were left. The soldiers reported their remaining arrows. 5, 7, 6. The man in charge listened intently, then ordered them to gather every last arrow into their quivers. Deep in the forest, the horde of orcs continued their advance. Their grunts echoed through the trees as they moved closer to the village. One of the archers looked at the advancing horde, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He knew the bows were good, but could they really take down that many orcs from this far away? Suddenly, a chorus of screams erupted from the orc ranks. Something had them terrified. The archer grimly stated the obvious. If they didn't take down at least 2 orcs with every shot, they were all doomed. The odds were stacked against them. The order to fire rang out, and the archers released their arrows. The arrows flew with deadly speed, striking the orcs with brutal force. Deep within the forest, the orcs were suddenly ambushed. Something tore through their ranks, and they didn't even know what was happening. The man watched in disbelief as the orcs fell, unable to even see the arrows. He realized that these weren't just bows, they were magic items. He immediately ordered the Ghost Horse Brigade to follow him. He sprinted towards the door, his face etched with urgency. He had to get to the general. He shouted for the general, his voice filled with desperation. He needed to tell him what was happening. The man's eyes went wide as he shouted something. He looked absolutely terrified. Suddenly, the orcs were caught in a deadly ambush. They were being torn apart, not even knowing what hit them. The attack was clearly a hit and run. The enemy struck hard and fast, leaving the orcs in disarray. The orc laughed like a maniac. He cackled. The orc roared. He looked eager to chase down his prey. The orcs charged through the forest, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. They ran as fast as they could, eager to get to the fight. An orc fell from the sky, taken completely by surprise. Below him, the men on horseback were ready for the next attack. The orcs stood their ground, weapons ready. Suddenly, one of them looked up, his face showing confusion. He wondered what was going on. Chief Mukable roared, threatening to tear apart anyone who dared to run from the humans. He was determined to lead his horde to victory. The orc raised his weapon high, promising victory to those who fought with him. He urged the warriors to show the humans the true valor of the orcs. Chief Mukable, the hero and strategist, roared out a command to his army. The orcs responded with a deafening cheer, shouting his name over and over. Chief Mukable's eyes burned with fury as he gave the order. He commanded them to split into 4 groups and attack the village without mercy. The orcs surged forward, their numbers overwhelming. They raced toward the village, eager to spill blood and cause chaos. One of the men looked completely shocked. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Panic set in as the men realized the danger. Someone shouted for everyone to hurry back to the village and prepare for the attack. The orc roared, a guttural sound that echoed through the trees. He towered over the fence, ready to attack anyone who dared to stand in his way. The spear thrust forward with deadly speed. The orc didn't hesitate, driving the weapon straight through the man, felling him instantly. The orc stood over his fallen foe, blood dripping from his spear. He snarled, promising death to anyone else who dared to oppose him. The man lay motionless on the ground, his life extinguished in an instant. The scene of the attack was gruesome, a testament to the orc's brutal strength. Suddenly, the orc screamed in agony as an arrow pierced his arm. He stumbled back, clutching the wound and roaring in pain. The archer watched in desperation as the injured man groaned, barely conscious. He shouted something, trying to shake him awake. The archer cursed under his breath. Damn it, he thought. They were running out of time, and men. The battle raged on around them. The archer watched as more orcs swarmed forward, their numbers overwhelming the remaining soldiers. The archer grabbed the injured man by the shoulder, trying to get him back in the fight. He said something. The battlefield was a scene of carnage, with bodies strewn across the ground. The remaining soldiers fought with grim determination, knowing their survival depended on it. The soldiers fought with everything they had, knowing they were outnumbered. One of them yelled, ordering everyone to push the orcs outside, because if they broke through, they were all screwed. The orcs crashed into the village, attacking anyone they could find. A villager watched in terror as one of the monsters charged toward him, teeth bared. The soldier swung his weapon, knocking the orc back. He cursed at the monster, demanding to know who gave those pig bastards permission to even speak. He was starting to feel like things were getting out of hand. The soldier gritted his teeth, striking down another orc. He yelled to his comrades that they'd killed maybe 200 of the monsters, but another 400 had just shown up to take their place. The soldier dodged a blow and slashed at an orc's leg. He told the others that at this rate, it would be impossible to hold out until reinforcements arrived. If it were just them, they could run, but they couldn't leave the villagers behind. The orcs swarmed the village, their crude weapons crashing against anything in their path. The villagers fought back desperately, knowing what was at stake if the line broke. The man gritted his teeth, swinging his axe with renewed determination. He knew they were in a tough spot, but he yelled that they just had to hold out, no matter what. Another soldier struck down an orc, his face set with grim resolve. He agreed, saying that running away from pigs wasn't something a man of Gari would ever do. From the forest, Chief Mukable roared, his voice echoing across the battlefield as he gave the order to charge. The horde surged forward, a green tide crashing against the village defenses. The soldier braced himself, his muscles tensing as he prepared for the inevitable clash. He roared, ready to meet the charge head. The soldier stood over the orc he had just killed, the monster's body pinned to the ground by the wooden spikes. He knew they couldn't give up, no matter how bad things got. They just had to hang in there. The soldiers stood their ground, spears ready, over the body of the fallen orc. One of them scoffed, saying that a real warrior wouldn't run from a pig like that. That's not what a man from Gari would do. From the darkness of the trees, Chief Mukable roared, his voice full of fury, as he ordered the horde to charge. The orcs surged forward, a wave of green muscle and crude weapons crashing towards the village. The soldiers braced themselves, preparing for the inevitable impact. Meanwhile, the orcs continued their relentless charge, their numbers seemingly endless. The two soldiers suddenly turned their heads, their eyes widening in surprise. One of them muttered, pointing towards the horizon, calling out for the Grand Envoy. The orc army stood ready, spears glinting in the dim light of the forest. They were ready to meet their enemies in battle, their numbers seemingly endless. The orc leader threw his head back and laughed, a sound that echoed through the trees. He was enjoying the thought of the upcoming battle, confident in his army's strength. The orcs laughed along with their leader. He ordered them to resume the pig hunt, eager to chase down the remaining villagers. The orcs swarmed the village, their crude weapons raised high. They were determined to kill every last villager, enjoying the terror they inflicted. The orcs continued their assault, their battle cries filling the air. The villagers screamed in terror as they were cut down, unable to defend themselves against the overwhelming force. The orcs began to move into a wedge formation, their spears pointed forward. They were ready to meet the enemy head-on, trusting in their numbers and strength. An orc squealed, spotting the approaching human cavalry. The orcs braced themselves, knowing the battle was about to begin. Very Lokwi, Varnaza, the strategist revolutionary of the orcs, announced himself, declaring he had spent his life preparing for this day. He told them that no matter how skilled the knights were, they'd never break through their wall of brave warriors, urging them to stand together and live, or scatter and die. The orcs began to chant, calling out for Mukul to unite. They raised their weapons, ready to fight as one. The orcs continued their chant, the sound echoing through the forest. They were ready to face whatever came next, their determination unwavering. The orcs continued to chant, calling out for Mukul to unite them. They raised their weapons high, ready to fight as one. The orcs kept chanting, but one of them wondered what the cavalry was doing. Another orc yelled that the cavalry would be crushed against their wall. The soldier realized that if the cavalry ran into the orc wall, they would be flung away. He found them to be a strange bunch. The Ghost Horse Brigade charged forward at full speed, ready to break through the orc lines. The Ghost Horse Brigade continued their charge, their speed and determination unwavering. The orcs stood shoulder to shoulder, forming an impenetrable wall of muscle and steel. They were ready to meet the charge of the Ghost Horse Brigade head-on, confident in their numbers and strength. An orc stood atop a rocky cliff, watching the human cavalry approach. He yelled that the human cavalry was running away from their might, mocking their supposed valor. The orcs roared with approval, their voices blending into a thunderous cheer. They chanted for the glory of the orcs, their excitement reaching a fever pitch. The man smirked, addressing the archers under his command. He asked them if they could possibly miss a target they could hit with their eyes closed, confident in their skill. The archers drew their bows, aiming with deadly precision. At the man's command, they released a volley of arrows, sending a storm of projectiles hurtling towards the enemy. The arrows rained down on the orcs, piercing through their armor. Many fell to the ground, defeated before they could even reach the village. Chief Mukabal stood atop a rock, watching the human cavalry. He noted that they were moving as expected, playing right into their trap. Chief Mukabal roared, his voice filled with urgency. He screamed at his warriors to scatter, hoping to minimize the damage. The archers' volleys continued to tear through the orc ranks. Orcs scattered in every direction, trying to avoid the deadly rain of arrows. The commander watched the orcs scatter, a smirk playing on his lips. He explained to his companion that they had foolishly banded together, making themselves easy targets. Very Lokwi, Rivarniza, declared that they were launching a full offensive counterattack. The orc general screamed for his soldiers to charge. Mukabal yelled for his warriors to form up. He urged them to unite and stand together against the enemy. The commander ordered the archers to loose their arrows. He then commanded them to scatter and disperse to avoid being caught in the counterattack. Mukabal desperately screamed at his warriors to form up. He then changed his mind and told them to scatter, realizing the situation was hopeless. An orc fell to the ground, lifeless. The arrow pierced his heart, ending his life instantly. The arrow found its mark, silencing the orc chief for good. Panic spread through the ranks as the orcs realized what had happened. They screamed about the loss of their leader. The commander showed no mercy. He coldly ordered his troops to slaughter the remaining orcs. There was no room for prisoners. The orcs broke and ran, fear driving them forward. They desperately tried to escape the archers' arrows. The battle paused for a moment. The human soldiers cheered, their voices echoing across the battlefield. They were celebrating their victory over the orcish horde, relieved that they had survived. The village was safe, at least for now. The sound of hooves echoed through the area. The mounted soldiers rode in tight formation, their armor glinting in the sunlight. From above, the scale of the army was clear. The soldiers moved with purpose, their numbers stretching as far as the eye could see. The villagers stared up in shock, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and disbelief. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. The soldiers towered over the grateful villagers, their presence a stark reminder of the power that had saved them. The cost of that power was clear in the blood on the ground. The commander's voice boomed across the village. He demanded an interpreter, calling for Tiora to come forward. He needed someone who could speak the local language, and he needed them now. The armored commander announced that they would be leaving right away. The soldier looked up at him, surprised by the sudden order. The soldier pointed, trying to show the general something important. The commander followed his gaze, waiting to see what was so urgent. The villagers asked what would become of them if the orcs left now. They begged the commander to consider their safety, their voices filled with desperation. The villagers dropped to their knees, begging the commander to protect them. They pleaded with him, seeing him as their only hope against the coming darkness. The commander turned to the soldier and asked if he wanted to become a slave. He questioned if there was really any difference between that and living in a kingdom, his voice laced with cynicism. The commander looked down at the villagers, his voice echoing with conviction. He reminded them that they were people who lived to protect their nation, their families, and their people. He emphasized that they didn't take up the sword to protect the strong, only to hand everything over to others. A villager, wounded and dying, begged to be saved. The commander dismissed his pleas, stating that this land was their kingdom alone. He questioned if they didn't understand that they must protect their own kingdom and that they shouldn't have summoned people they couldn't handle. The commander declared that a kingdom protected by the strength of others was bound to fall. He then presented them with a choice: become slaves or take up a sword and risk their lives to protect their families. The commander raised his sword high, the metal glinting in the sunlight. He declared that if they took up the sword, they would become his people and his family. The commander watched the villagers, his expression unreadable. He waited for them to decide, the fate of their village hanging in the balance. The commander declared he would go back. The crowd watched as he turned his horse around, his decision final. A villager stepped forward, shouting that he would take up the sword himself. The commander stood silently, watching the man's sudden display of courage. The woman looked at her son, Euron, and asked him if he would protect his family, even if she died. She was desperate to know if he would carry on if she fell. Euron held the sword tightly, his small hands gripping the hilt. Another villager shouted that he would fight, inspired by the boy's bravery. The commander looked down at Euron, his expression stern. He pointed out that Euron's grip on the sword was sloppy, showing no emotion for the boy's courage. The commander showed Euron the proper way to grip a sword. He told him that now that he held it correctly, he mustn't think about dying. The commander stared intently at Euron, telling him that he must live to protect his family. Euron looked up at him, his expression firm. The air hung heavy with anticipation. Everyone knew what was coming next. The order came from above: retreat. The Goguryeo army turned as one and began their retreat. The soldiers moved with practiced precision, each one trusting the others to cover their escape. The sky above was filled with crows. They flew in every direction, their dark shapes a stark contrast against the bright blue. Crows gathered on a wooden fence, their dark eyes watching everything. They perched close together, a silent, watchful flock. A body lay sprawled on the ground, surrounded by crows. The birds pecked at the flesh, their dark feast painting the ground with blood. A knight on horseback gazed down at the gruesome scene. The crows continued their grim work, undisturbed by his presence. Sir Telemann reported back to his lord. He said that he'd searched the entire area, but there were no slash and burn farmers to be found. The knight surveyed the scene from horseback. The bodies lay still, a testament to the brutal fight that had just ended. The lord asked Sir Telemann for his assessment. Sir Telemann explained that both the orcs and the mercenaries had been killed by the same group. It seemed the slash and burn farmers were responsible, but they had already fled, leaving behind arrows of an unfamiliar design, suggesting a new faction had entered the scene. The lord looked absolutely furious. He cursed the bastards who dared to covet his property. The knights rode through the area, their faces grim. The air was heavy with unspoken tension. The lord declared that once all the slash and burn farmers were gathered to pay tribute to the kingdom, he would eliminate them. His eyes burned with cold fury. A booming voice echoed across the land, declaring that the great lion had arrived. The news spread quickly, carried on the wind. The order to open the gates rang out. The soldiers moved quickly, raising the heavy barriers to allow passage. Villagers watched as a woman approached, commenting on how pale she looked. One of them wondered if the sunlight was different here, making her skin appear so fair. Another villager chimed in, noting that she looked sick. Her frail appearance caused concern among the onlookers. A man leered at the woman, noticing a dark bruise under her eye, but still found her slender and pretty. He then turned to the others, asking if they were drooling over her. The great lion noticed some of the soldiers weren't training as hard as they should. He teased them about slacking off while he was gone. The soldiers nervously denied it. Then he asked about the refugees and what their situation was. The great lion declared that from now on, the refugees would be considered people of Gari. Someone then asked if he was finally going to continue the line of the High Emperor. The Great Lion asked what they were talking about. He explained that accepting them as people meant they needed soldiers to fight off anyone who tried to invade. He also needed women and children who could become the heart of their will to protect. The other man started to say something, but the Great Lion cut him off. He looked down at him and said something. The soldier, standing near HWY, asked the Great Lion to continue the line of the High Emperor, since he had already accepted them as his people. HWY looked on, waiting for the response. The Great Lion stood with one of his advisors, looking out at the new land. The advisor admitted that they had no idea where they were, or even if this was the same world they had once known. The Great Lion knew that giving the soldiers and the people a goal would be a pillar to support their lives. He knew he had to make a decision. The advisor looked at the Great Lion and told him to be the High Emperor, saying he couldn't do it. HWY looked shocked, wondering how he could say such a thing. The Great Lion chuckled, wondering if he should have Buru or Who are you? Do it." The advisor was furious, telling him that this wasn't a situation for such jokes. The great lion turned away, lost in thought. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. HWI, commander of the guard, declared that he had spent his entire life on the battlefield. Because of that, he admitted he wasn't good at running a country. The great lion turned to Commander Demudiok, telling him to handle the affairs of the place as he saw fit. Commander Demudiok started to object, but the great lion cut him off. The great lion explained that he would do what he could do. He told Commander Demudiok that he too had to take charge of the part he was good at. He reminded him that an incompetent emperor or high emperor would ruin the nation. The great lion admitted that the only things he knew how to do were wage war and protect Gauri. He seemed lost in thought. The soldiers started whispering amongst themselves, clearly shocked. They mentioned something about the Titan Uljok and the Titan clan, wondering what in the world that was and what was going on. The soldiers looked at the kneeling dwarves with suspicion. One of them scoffed, saying there was no way they could be related to anyone they knew. He found the idea ridiculous. The soldiers moved closer, studying the dwarves. They pointed out how pale they were, noting that they definitely weren't from around there. They seemed to be trying to figure out where they came from. One of the dwarves looked up, his face etched with worry. The sound of pounding feet grew louder as the dwarves tried to run, but a horde of orcs was closing in fast. The three stone brothers were desperately trying to outrun the orcs. One of them wondered what they should do, fear evident in his eyes. One of the dwarves looked absolutely miserable, tears welling up in his eyes. He cried out that it was all his fault. He cursed his own greed for wanting to find Rosestein, which led them all the way to the Laganza Mountains, only to be chased by orcs. The soldiers fought hard against the orcs, each swing of their swords a dance of death. As one of the soldiers fought, he thought to himself that those people had yellow skin, black hair, and black eyes. The dwarves looked up, their eyes wide with surprise. Were those people humans, they wondered? The dwarves looked at the soldiers, their faces etched with confusion. Something wasn't adding up, and they didn't know what to make of it. The soldiers watched the dwarves carefully, studying their every move. They muttered that they were a little different from the humans they knew, almost like General Baru and General Meanwhile, back at his workshop, Old Man Jang, Gauri's blacksmith, was hard at work. The sounds of hammering and forging filled the air. One of the soldiers watched the dwarves working at their forge, his brow furrowed in thought. They seemed to be blacksmiths, all right, but he couldn't figure out what they were doing all the way out here. One of the dwarves lifted a metal bar, examining it closely. He marveled at the perfect balance and the pure iron, wondering how a human could create such a weapon. Suddenly, a shout rang out, cutting through the air. An orc guard yelled to open the gates, announcing that the great lion had arrived. The blacksmiths stopped what they were doing, their eyes widening. They were clearly shocked by the announcement. Two heavily armored men rode into the area on horseback. One of them grinned, calling out to his brothers. One of the dwarves looked up, his eyes widening. He was amazed by the person's height, bronze skin, and black hair. He realized the legend was true, and that was why all the weapons here were made. The blacksmiths watched the dwarves, confused by their reaction. The dwarves glared down at the blacksmiths and demanded to know what this nonsense was all about. They seemed furious and ready for a fight. The blacksmiths just laughed like maniacs at the dwarves' anger. One of them taunted the dwarves, asking them what all this was about. The general stood alone on the ship, gazing up at the night sky. The stars seemed so distant and unfamiliar, a reminder of how far they were from home. He was deep in thought, trying to figure out what to do next. The general spoke with a calm, steady voice, acknowledging the gravity of their situation. He pointed out that they didn't know where they were, or even if this was the same world they once knew. He urged them to make a decision, knowing that their future depended on it. The great lion stood in the water, his expression serious. He commanded them to carry out everything according to his will, his voice echoing with authority. The great lion remembered his past, lying on the dock. He had been a descendant of the High Emperor, but because he was an illegitimate son, he'd spent half his life on the battlefield. The great lion's expression was unreadable, but his eyes were full of determination. He stared into the distance, lost in thought. The Gauri he sought to protect had gone up in flames. The great lion remembered coming all this way to protect the High Emperor's legitimate line. Unable to even turn his horse back, it turned out the child wasn't a boy, but a girl. Furthermore, the child born within the royal household wasn't even a descendant of the High Emperor. The soldiers waited, their faces grim. The great lion knew he had to make a choice for the soldiers who believed in him. If this was the world he came from, he would build his strength and strike the Dang. If not, then continuing the history of Gauri would be his duty and purpose for those who followed him. The great lion lion stared ahead, his face unreadable. The gravity of the choice weighed heavily on him. He wondered aloud if the die had been cast, not sure if he was ready to face the consequences. The great lion walked down the dock, his footsteps echoing in the night. He approached the gate, his resolve hardening with each step. There was no turning back now. The base sat nestled on the coast, a beacon of hope in this new world. The mountains stood guard in the distance, silent witnesses to the birth of a new nation. The future was uncertain, but the potential was undeniable. The construction site buzzed with activity, the sounds of hammering and sawing filling the air. A watchtower was going up, a sign of the growing settlement and the promise of security. Turns out, the slash and burn farmers and the soldiers had become pretty close. In fact, they'd grown close enough to start falling in love, which was pretty unexpected. It only took about a month for those bonds to form. The food problem? Solved. Thanks to the seeds the slash and burn farmers brought, everyone could eat. As for those dwarves, turns out they weren't just blacksmiths, but skilled architects too. So, the housing problem? Also solved. The dwarves were really impressed by the ironworking techniques. Now, they're working under Old Man Jang, making all sorts of things. It's a real testament to the Titan clan. Two of the men looked excited. They agreed that it was all thanks to General Baru and General Uru. They were ready to work hard. The problem was that they were running low on supplies for the wedding ceremony, which was only a few days away. They didn't have enough liquor, meat, or clothing, and they were also short on bows. Turns out, Veron had a plan. He suggested sneaking into the city and selling the hides and bones from the monsters they'd been hunting. That way, they could make some money. With the money they earned, they could buy the food, clothing, and even weapons they couldn't get here. One of the men volunteered to go, telling the Great Lion that he would go since the commander of the guard was busy. He'd survey the situation and run the errand. The Great Lion listened, his face unreadable. He seemed to be carefully considering the plan and the offer. In the distance, the walled city stood tall, a mix of buildings and fortifications. It was their only hope for getting the supplies they desperately needed. Riding alongside the Great Lion, one of the men asked why he'd insisted on coming. He pointed out that the Great Lion usually ordered him to survey the situation, so it seemed strange that he was here instead. The Great Lion smiled slightly, responding that the other should just honestly admit he was curious about the city. With that, he told them to move out. The group moved along the dusty path, the horses kicking up small clouds of dirt with each step. The wagons rumbled behind them, the wooden wheels making a dull thudding sound. Hidden amongst the trees, a lone figure watched the group pass by. They kept themselves concealed, peering out from behind the thick trunk of a tree. The walled city loomed in the distance, a tall structure of stone and buildings. It was the group's destination, the place where they hoped to find the supplies they needed. As the group approached the gates, armored guards stepped forward, blocking their path. One of them sternly ordered them to move along, his voice leaving no room for argument. Bangul Ray Inca approached the guard, looking at him curiously. The guard acknowledged him with a respectful greeting, saying he had worked hard. Surprised by the guard's kind words, the traveler laughed nervously. He reached out and shook the guard's hand, clearly caught off guard by the unexpected gesture. Bikin Nuga urged the traveler to go inside quickly, his voice laced with a sense of urgency. He seemed eager to get them through the gates and into the city as soon as possible. The cloaked figures moved forward on horseback, accompanied by the armored guard. The rhythmic sound of hooves echoed through the area, a constant reminder of their journey. The armored guard, Mechalin, suddenly raised his hand. He ordered them to stop, his voice firm and commanding. The cloaked figures immediately obeyed, halting their horses. The silence was heavy as they waited, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hoods. The soldier peered intently at the cloaked figures. He asked if they had black hair and brown skin, his tone laced with suspicion. A pair of hands emerged, holding out a bag. The bag had a strange logo on it, a symbol that seemed oddly out of place. The cloaked figure passed the bag over to the guard, completing the exchange. The guard laughed, clearly pleased with the deal. The guard gave the signal, waving them through. He shouted that they could pass. The group rode forward, passing through the massive gates. They were finally entering the city. Veron suddenly stopped, his face serious. He asked what that man's name was just now, repeating the name, Irun Kalsuman. The cloaked figure's eyes narrowed, a flicker of recognition in them. Kalsuman, he remembered. The cloaked figure glanced back, a hint of something unreadable in his eyes. Then he disappeared into the crowded city streets. The group continued riding deeper into the city. People moved out of their way as they passed. Veron examined the goods closely. He realized that it was definitely ogre hide, which meant there had to be ogre blood as well. The man looked at Veron with disbelief. He asked how on earth Veron managed to kill an ogre, saying that even 20 soldiers would struggle to take one down. Veron told him he would tell the story later, but to calculate everything first. first. He then asked if he happened to need ogre blood. The shopkeeper wondered who would buy the ogre blood, since only wizards would want it. He doubted a wizard would even be in such a remote place. Suddenly, a man appeared and said he would buy it. The shopkeeper looked surprised and asked if the man was a wizard. Rigel examined a bottle of the purple liquid. He thought the condition was excellent, and with it, he could finally be free from the cursed second circle. Rigel asked the shopkeeper what he thought of the ogre blood. He offered to take 3 bottles for 1 gold and 50 silver. The shopkeeper looked shocked and said something. He told Rigel that not even 1 gold and 50 silver per bottle was impossible. Rigel held out the ogre blood and the coins. He asked the shopkeeper to wait a moment, offering 1 gold and 50 silver for the purchase. The shopkeeper looked desperate and begged Rigel to accept the money, saying it was all he had. He then insulted Rigel, calling him a scammer and a beggar. Rigel was furious and yelled at the shopkeeper, asking how he dared to insult him. He declared that he was Rigel, the genius wizard said to appear once in 100 years. The shopkeeper looked at Rigel suspiciously. He questioned why a genius wizard would be broke and stuck at the second circle, since third circle wizards were showered with gold. The 3 men stood in silence, the tension hanging heavy in the air. The shopkeeper looked nervous, while Rigel seemed to be trying to control his anger. Rigel began chanting the words of a spell, his voice echoing through the shop. He gripped the bottle tightly as he spoke the ancient words. Oum Sala di Kre Taha, flame born of the desire of fire. Rigel gasped, shocked by the power surging through him. He couldn't believe it. He was actually using magic. Even though he hadn't reached the third circle, he could still feel the magic flowing. Rigel was absolutely furious. He yelled at the shopkeeper, telling him that he had just made a huge mistake. He shouted that the shopkeeper had committed the sin of insulting a wizard. The shopkeeper went flying backwards, crashing into the shelves. He landed on the floor with a thud, clearly hurt. Rigel stood over him, his eyes blazing with anger. One of the men wondered if beggars were practicing magic in this town. Another said that it was more likely a sorcerer had become a beggar. They discussed Rigel's situation, trying to figure out what had just happened. The shopkeeper lay on the floor, his body aching from the force of the blast. He gasped for air, trying to recover from the sudden attack. Rigel turned to the 2 men who had been watching the whole thing. He told them that the sorcery in this place was confusing. He added that he was called a genius, who appeared only once in a century. Rigel went on to explain that others needed 2 years to master mana, but he did it in just half a year. He said that becoming a grand wizard was only a matter of time. Rigel's expression turned sad. He explained that when he stopped at the second circle, his master abandoned him. Rigel looked down at the ground, ashamed. He told them that he became an outcast wherever he went. Rigel was convinced there had to be a way forward. He threw himself into his studies, gaining knowledge that he thought rivaled even the most powerful archmages. Despite all his efforts, Rigel couldn't get past the second circle. He felt like he was banging his head against a wall. Rigel begged his master not to leave him. He was sure that if he could just get his hands on some ogre blood, he could finally reach the second circle. One of the men wondered if they were heading back so soon because of the old guy. He'd heard that the wizard in this land was supposed to be rare and really smart. The other guy asked if he'd kidnapped the wizard, afraid someone else would snatch him up first. The man scoffed, saying that was total nonsense. He'd simply brought him along. One of the men wondered what they were planning to do with Rigel. The other guy shrugged, saying he was rare and valuable, so why not grab him? Rigel woke up with a start, tears in his eyes. One of the men noticed and asked why he was crying. The captor acted all innocent, saying it was natural to cry after being kidnapped. He even complained about the double standard, saying when he does it, it's love, but when others do it, it's a crime. Rigel glared at his captors, thinking they were fools. They must not know that a simple rope couldn't hold a wizard like him. Rigel began to chant, calling on the power of mana to shake its strength with him. He was determined to break free from his bonds. Rigel gathered mana, his eyes glowing with power. He yelled that his energy bolt spell, though only second circle, was not something to be taken lightly. But before the spell could hit its mark, one of the men casually raised a hand. A surge of energy met Rigel's bolt, stopping it dead in its tracks. The system flashed the word block, confirming the man's incredible defense. The air crackled with the remnants of the spell's energy. With Rigel's attack easily deflected, the group continued on their way. They didn't even bother to look back, leaving Rigel stewing in his frustration. Rigel looked absolutely stunned. He stammered, wondering how anyone could stop his spell. The man looked amused, finding the situation quite thrilling. The 3 men continued on their way, the horses trotting along the dirt path. In the back of the wagon, the captured mage sat silently, stewing in his frustration. The man on horseback found the situation thrilling and joked about it. Meanwhile, Rigel was furious and demanded to know how his magic had been nullified. He couldn't believe someone could just stop his spell like that. Rigel Rigel, desperate to understand his captors, used interpretation translation magic. He demanded to know who these guys were and what they wanted. Rigel was amazed that they could speak his language. He pressed them, asking how they could block an energy bolt without a shield. One of the men replied that it was due to item power, telling him to mind his own business. Rigel wondered what item power meant. He was relieved that they could communicate, as he had been worried about leaving the liar behind in the city. Rigel, frustrated and still tied up, demanded to know how they had turned his energy bolt into nothing. He pressed them to reveal the formula they had used, desperate for answers. One of the captors smirked at Rigel. He called him old man and said that it was rude to ask about another's secret arts so carelessly, clearly unwilling to share any information. Rigel was taken aback by the response. He seemed to suddenly understand something, his eyes widening slightly. Down the path, a group of figures approached at a steady pace. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the trees. The captor glanced at the approaching group with a serious expression. He decided that they should deal with these uninvited guests first, his hand moving towards his sword. The captor looked at the approaching group. He figured it would be foolish to lose a considerable income over a single moment of greed. He was weighing his options. He glanced back at the cart. The items loaded on it were quite numerous, even things that looked expensive. He was getting greedy. Just in time, those two moved first, he thought. If he killed these guys and took the items, he could keep the source of income and take the goods. He was ready to attack. Unlucky bastards you are. The captor unleashed a sudden blast of magic. The approaching group didn't even have time to react before they were engulfed in flames. The smoke cleared, revealing a figure standing unharmed. A familiar face, Kalsuman. The captor was stunned. The captors didn't hesitate. They unleashed their magic, sending flames roaring toward the approaching group. The defenders were caught in the blaze, but the smoke cleared to reveal one of the defenders completely unharmed. He retaliated with his own magic, sending a wave of fire back at the captors. The flames didn't seem to bother him at all. He walked right through the fire, his eyes fixed on the captors. With a burst of speed, the attacker closed the distance. He struck one of the captors with a swift, deadly blow. He shouted something. The remaining captor watched in horror as his ally fell. He screamed, hoping someone would come to their aid. The captor, now desperate, screamed at the other men. He demanded to know if they were going to just stand there or actually do something. Meanwhile, the defender held up a card, channeling his power. The card glowed as he prepared to cast Extinguish Fire. The flames erupted, engulfing the men who had been ordered to attack. One of them screamed as the fire burned him. The defender stood in the aftermath, completely untouched by the flames. He held the card steady, a look of determination on his face. The fire still raged around him, but the defender stood tall. The attackers were down, defeated and burning. The swordsman loomed over the tied-up man. The man on the ground looked up and said something. The swordsman raised his blade high, ready to strike. The world seemed to turn red as the final moment approached. The man screamed, his voice filled with terror. The swordsman's blade was about to fall. The swordsman stood over his fallen foe, sword in hand. The other man watched, a look of doubt on his face as he said something. The man pleaded with the swordsman to stop. He said something. The swordsman stared down at the tied-up man, his eyes filled with cold determination. He took a breath and said something. The tied-up man looked back, sweat dripping down his face, clearly terrified. The swordsman focused his energy and called out. Blue energy surged from his hand. The tied-up man screamed in terror, his face contorted in pain. The swordsman looked down at the card in his hand, a frustrated expression on his face. He sighed. The swordsman glanced at the flames nearby, then back at the tied-up man. He wondered aloud, sounding annoyed. The swordsman looked down at the tied-up man, a strange expression on his face. He checked the man's pulse. He said something, his voice flat. The swordsman watched the tied-up mage, thinking about how he cast magic with just a trigger word and no chanting. He was impressed by the mage's skill. The old man looked down from his perch, thinking about their direction. He realized they were heading towards the Laganza mountain range, where the dragon lived. The old man turned to the tied-up mage, his eyes widening. The old man thought that the mage must be a dragon. The old man's hands trembled as he thought about becoming an attendant of a dragon, the origin of magic. He knew that if he could surpass the second circle. The tied-up mage looked up at the old man and smiled. He apologized for the kidnapping, his voice calm. Rigel, still tied up, pleaded with the swordsman. He insisted that even if they didn't like him, they must have brought him here because they needed him. Rigel promised to do anything they commanded. The swordsman looked down at Rigel, thinking about what he had just said. He wondered if the mage could really be of use to them. Suddenly, the old man's eyes widened in shock. He seemed to have realized something important. The old man was stunned by the sight of the village. He commented on how well organized it was, especially given its location in the Laganza mountains. He added that the discipline discipline and morale of the soldiers rivaled even the empire's. A man on horseback greeted someone as Grand Master. Then, he noticed the old man behind him. He asked who the old man was, before shouting out in disbelief, calling him Titan. The men wondered why they kept being called Titans. The white-haired man added that even dwarves, thought to have vanished after the divine demonic war 1,000 years ago, were here. Kalsuman scoffed at Rigel, correcting him that he was a mage, not a sorcerer. He reminded Varan that he hadn't forgotten the crime of trying to harm him. Varan stammered, saying it was because Kalsuman had insulted him. Kalsuman ordered Baru and Uru to take Varan to the execution ground. They acknowledged the order. Kalsuman then asked where they had found him. One of the men replied that they had found him on the way. The town square was buzzing with people. A fire crackled on a wooden platform, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. The air was thick with anticipation. Kalsuman sat on his throne, looking down at the old man. He pointed out that while he might have said he simply picked him up, it was also true that he had kidnapped him. Kalsuman continued, saying that he couldn't forgive the old man for trying to hurt Varan, who was their guide and one of his people. The old man stammered, trying to defend himself, saying they had insulted him, a mage. Kalsuman listened to the old man. He understood and thanked him, but then pointed out that the old man had also insulted him by trying to harm his servant. The old man looked absolutely shocked, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He protested, saying, "No, how could you say such a thing? It's survival of the fittest. Good triumphs over evil." The voice echoed through the throne room, declaring that it wasn't about good punishing evil, but about the victor taking everything. In the end, the strong take it all, he insisted. The old man didn't seem impressed by the speech. He just scoffed. Kalsuman dismissed the old man's complaints. He said a weakling who insults others is only speeding up their own demise. He wondered if kidnapping was really the right word for it. Kalsuman continued his verbal assault. He asked the old man if he even realized he could have been killed right there. Kalsuman wondered if the old man even had the skill to command respect as a mage. The old man looked up, his face etched with despair. He felt so pathetic, he thought. His entire 75 years of life felt so regretful and wretched. The old man looked up, surprised by the offer. Kalsuman was actually going to give him a chance. Kalsuman towered over the old man, laying out his offer. Would he keep wandering around like a beggar, enduring insults, or would he throw in his lot with Kalsuman? The old man looked up, a confused expression on his face. What did Kalsuman mean by that? Better than an outstanding mage. What was he getting at? Kalsuman turned and walked away, explaining what he needed. He needed a sage, someone with great knowledge of this world. Kalsuman paused, looking back at the old man. So, would he join him? He'd ask one last time. Kalsuman stared intently, telling the old man that he needed him. He wanted to know if the old man would join his cause. The old man looked up, curious, and asked what Kalsuman would do for him. Kalsuman declared that he wouldn't stand by while anyone mistreated his family or his people. Kalsuman's expression hardened as he promised to smash anyone who dared to look down on the old man to bits. He looked absolutely serious. The old man knelt down, bowing his head. He declared that he would serve Kalsuman as his master. The night sky stretched above the village. The alliance between Kalsuman and the old man was now sealed. The old man was surprised by the turn of events. He thought Kalsuman would treat him like a simple servant, nothing more. Kalsuman ordered Baru and Uru to take care of the old man. He declared that from now on, the old man would be the one teaching them. Baru complained, wondering what they were supposed to learn at their age, but Kalsuman ignored him. He said that his master had given him the honor of teaching the legendary Titan clan. Kalsuman looked at his men and asked if they were just going to hide forever. He insisted that they needed to understand this new place so they could decide what to do next. Kalsuman told the old man that instead of relying on the power of the ring, he needed to learn their language. He then said that until the old man did, he would be holding on to the ring. Kalsuman took the ring that was enchanted with translation magic. He asked if he looked like someone who would want such a thing. He figured the old man must have his reasons. The old man glanced at the dwarves sprawled out nearby. He thought to himself that even if they were legendary clan dwarves, they were still just dwarves. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. Kalsuman bowed respectfully to the old man. He greeted him formally as his master. The old man took the ring and examined it closely, turning it over in his hands. He looked puzzled. The old man looked up, a strange expression on his face. He announced that the ring was broken. The old man stared at the ring, a look of disbelief on his face. He twisted it between his fingers, trying to understand what had happened. The old man stared at the ring in disbelief. He stammered, trying to explain that it wasn't broken, but then it hit him. Varen was already gone. He turned and saw the closed door, realizing Varen had escaped. Under the cover of night, horses pulled the cart through the forest. The riders urged them on, desperate to get away as quickly as possible. One of the riders turned back, his expression a mixture of concern and surprise. Something wasn't right. He could feel it. The man yelled, Cursing, he shouted at Varon to stop, but it was too late. The cart lurched as someone fell off. The man looked around, confused. He demanded to know what was going on, why they were abandoning the cart, what the hell was happening. The man with the sword grabbed the other man's arm, yanking him forward. He told him to hurry up, unless he wanted to die for nothing. The man stood his ground, his voice echoing through the trees. He warned that if they didn't hurry, they'd die a pointless death. The man cursed, realizing they had abandoned the cart. He couldn't believe they'd left it behind. He ordered his men to spread out and find them. They couldn't have gotten far. Under the dim light filtering through the trees, the men moved out. They began their search, their footsteps muffled by the forest floor. The man with blonde hair looked at the other man, his face etched with fear. He asked why they were coming this way, his voice barely above a whisper. The man looked up, his eyes wide with fear. He wondered if this was the end, if he was really going to die like this. The man stared at the bodies scattered around him, his mind racing. He couldn't believe it. The man with the black hair had taken care of 2 of them all by himself. That's insane. The man with the black hair told the guard to stay quiet. He offered him a deal. If he answered his questions honestly, he could go home and see his family again. He added with a smirk that he was single. The man with the black hair held the guard's wrist tightly. The guard was crying, the tears streaming down his face. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The man with the black hair looked directly into the guard's eyes. He demanded to know why they had attacked them. He wasn't going to let this go. The guard explained that an order came from the kingdom to conscript soldiers, so Baron Alvin was capturing slash and burn farmers to fill the quota. The man with the black hair realized that's why those mercenaries were after the farmers. He knew he had to hurry and tell the camp. The guard begged him to spare him. He stammered that he had a girlfriend. The man with the black hair asked the guard if he should kill him. The man with the black hair told the guard that he had answered as he asked, so he'd let him go as promised. He added that it'd make him a little uneasy if he went back the way they came, so he should close his eyes and walk that way until he counted to 1,000 before he headed back. He told the guard not to worry. One of the men asked if it would be all right to let him go, saying that if they let him go, a pursuit party might come after them. The tension was high as they waited for an answer. The man with the black hair told the others not to worry about that. He said the guard was an honest fellow and probably wouldn't sell them out. He reassured them that everything would be fine. The captor yelled for them to run at full speed, saying that he got it. He was clearly excited about something. The man with the black hair and the blonde man followed close behind. The blonde man looked back, a worried expression on his face. He muttered that the captor should have been more careful. He seemed genuinely concerned. The man with the black hair looked down at the body and called the dead man a liar. He stated that he had kept his promise and asked if they should get going. He showed no remorse. The soldiers stopped dead in their tracks, staring at the body on the ground. One of them exclaimed in shock, asking what was over there. Another realized that it was Pino and that he was dead. The soldiers drew their swords, the metal glinting in the dim light. The man with the black hair stared back at them, his expression unreadable. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The soldier looked up, a frustrated expression on his face. He muttered. One of the armored soldiers commented that there were only 2 of them. He insisted they finish this quickly and head back. The other soldier wondered what he was going to do. Someone was running fast, their footsteps echoing on the stone path. She was clearly in a hurry. Baru heard someone calling his name. It was Sarah. She asked him what brought him out so late. He chuckled and invited her inside. Sarah asked when Uncle Veron was coming. Baru replied that Veron should be there tomorrow, which seemed to put her at ease. Baru noticed something was bothering Sarah. She sighed, admitting that the road was dangerous. She worried about what the punitive troops might do this time. Baru asked Sarah if she was worried about traveling with just the con man. Sarah looked up at him, a little worried, honestly. Sarah admitted she was a little worried. Seeing his track record, trust was hard to come by. She sighed. Nothing ever goes smoothly. Baru told Sarah not to worry. Suddenly, he gave the order to charge. He knew that guy might spout nothing but high-order lies. Baru unsheathed his sword. He told everyone to charge forward. He knew the situation was dangerous, but they couldn't back down now. The soldiers charged forward, weapons raised. The clash of steel echoed through the forest as they crashed into the enemy. It was a chaotic scene. The warrior lunged forward with his sword, a whirlwind of motion. Turns out, he had once fought under Gibek. The force of his swing sent his opponent flying backwards through the air. He was known as the fight dummy. Steel clashed against steel, as the soldiers fought with unmatched fury. The battlefield was a scene of brutal chaos. Surrounded on all sides, the warrior spun, his sword a blur of motion. He was trapped, but he didn't look scared. His expression was hard, his eyes filled with determination. He was Gyeong Sam, the strongest of Gaori's inspectors, Baekjae's fight dummy. The man told the other to get moving. They were heading deeper into the dark forest. Suddenly, the man froze. His face went white. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He was clearly terrified. He wondered why that person was here. Turns out, a massive, twin-headed ogre was stomping through the forest towards them. The ground shook with each step. The ogre roared, its twin faces contorted in rage. The man screamed, paralyzed by fear. The man tried to keep it together, his face contorted with terror. He told himself to stay calm, but it wasn't working. He thought that the ogre might be the king of land monsters. But if it was the same Wung Sam who could cut down soldiers in one swing, he didn't know what to think. The man's eyes widened as he realized who he was facing. He was in deep trouble. Meanwhile, inside the building, the meeting was coming to an abrupt end. Something important was happening. An urgent report was coming in. The men inside waited anxiously to hear what the messenger had to say. The man reported smoke rising from the northern border tower, a trade partner. It seemed something had happened to the Fish and Burn village. He asked how far away it was, trying to figure out the scale of the problem. Less than half a day on horseback, came the reply. The man thought about the report. He couldn't ignore it. It was too close to home to just let it slide. The man addressed the group. They would decide whether those at the border were friend or foe on the spot. He ordered them to save the minimum defense. The man slammed his hand on the table, declaring that everyone else would march. The room went silent as they waited for his next order. The order went out. Full mobilization. The soldiers scrambled to mount up, grabbing their horses and arrows. It was time for war. The old man looked around, confused. The sudden march? Did something happen? He couldn't believe how quickly everything was moving. The march order was only just given. How could they move so fast? He was clearly shocked by the speed of the army's response. The army was already forming ranks. The leader on horseback watched as the troops lined up, ready to move out. The entire army was on the move. Row after row of soldiers marched forward, a massive force ready for war. The army marched relentlessly, an endless wave of soldiers moving towards the northern border. The ground vibrated with each step. The old man stared at the troops, amazed. He'd traveled all over, but he'd never seen soldiers this organized before. The amount of ki radiating from them was insane, rivaling even the Imperial Knights. A soldier looked ready to charge into battle. He was just waiting for the order to go, itching for a fight. The leader gave his orders. He told Uru to take Risel with him. Then he asked if the master was coming along as well. The leader turned his attention to Risel. He asked if Risel had ever seen a battlefield. Risel confirmed that he had, my lord. The leader gave Risel his instructions. He told him to watch their war today and report on how this front and their way of fighting were different. The leader's words carried a simple, undeniable power. You could smell the blood on him, but he remained calm. Every word he spoke was crystal clear, filled with authority. A subordinate knelt before the leader, listening intently. He responded with complete obedience, simply saying, the moment hung in the air, thick with anticipation. Something big was about to happen. The leader's face contorted with fury as he gave the order. He screamed, his voice echoing across the field. The gates swung open, and the troops surged forward. They charged out into the night, ready to follow their leader into whatever awaited them. The army stood ready, a sea of spears and flags stretching as far as the eye could see. Their leader sat firm in the saddle, his gaze fixed on what lay ahead. The moment hung in the air, heavy with anticipation of what was to come. The order came down, round up the useless, everyone except the men fit to fight, and the young women. The commander's cold voice continued, instructing them to deal with them. The order was given, short and brutal. Fire. The archers raised their bows, the tips of their arrows already ablaze. The arrows rained down on the village, setting everything ablaze. Screams of terror filled the air as the villagers were caught in the inferno. The commander clicked his tongue, unimpressed. He had heard the prisoners mention a larger settlement nearby and wondered if it was true. Another man grinned, clearly excited by the prospect. He figured it would be a fun hunt. Anyway, time to move on. The army marched on horseback, a large group of soldiers moving towards the bigger settlement. They were ready for whatever they might find. Two of the leaders rode side by side, their faces set with determination. They knew that this mission was important, and they were ready to do whatever it took. The night was quiet, the stars shining above the dark forest. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a loud crunch. It was a huge ogre, its two heads looking around as it took another step. The ground cracked under its massive weight. out. Two of the men watched the twin-headed ogre disappear into the trees. They kept their distance, not wanting to be seen. One of the men sighed in relief. He wondered what he had done to deserve all this, but at least they had managed to get away from the twin-headed ogre. The blonde man glanced over his shoulder, but froze when he saw a goblin standing there. The little monster grinned, holding a rock in its hand. The blonde man realized they had entered monster territory. The dark-haired man seemed surprised by the news and asked if that was true. The dark-haired man said they should leave quickly, but suddenly fell to the ground. He cursed in frustration. The dark-haired man was getting annoyed by the goblins. He kicked one away, but then paused, seemingly noticing something. The blonde man explained that baby goblins are only raised in goblin villages, so he had been about to suggest they leave them alone and get out of there. But something had changed his mind. The blonde man realized it was too late to escape. He said the dark-haired man should have stopped him because they were surrounded by a horde of goblins. The army stood still beneath the vast, starry sky. The air was quiet, but the tension was thick. You could feel that something was about to happen. The commander's face was grim. He ordered them to rest there for a bit, but to keep a close watch for any ambushes. His subordinate replied something. The commander examined an arrowhead closely. He said that judging by the insignia, they were Lord Alden's private soldiers. The other man acknowledged, and the commander continued, saying he'd heard Lord Alden had been capturing farmers from the area. The commander explained that the reason Lord Alden rarely came to the area was because of the ferocious monsters and the heavy losses an army would take. He added that since the city at the entrance to the Raganza Mountains was a commercial city, they didn't need many slaves. The commander paused, his expression serious. He said that in this case, he believed Lord Alden was gathering personnel for the war. He looked determined. The commander explained that the more developed a city's commerce, the more the wealthy tried to help their kids avoid being forced into service. So, it was common practice to buy serfs or slaves and send them to the battlefield in their place, along with a bribe. He figured that they were planning to use the captured farmers as slaves. The man thought they were insane. Did they really think they could win like that? He figured the Haiyan Kingdom probably didn't care whether they won or lost. The commander's words caught the other man off guard. He reacted in shock, asking what he meant by that. The commander explained that this country was situated between giant empires. The commander continued, explaining that it shared borders with two giant empires and faced a maritime empire across the sea. So, it had always been at the mercy of their checks and the demands of the stronger side. He added that when they went to war, they'd survived by dividing the spoils to both sides. So it didn't matter who won or lost. The man explained that was the reality of the Haiyan Kingdom. It was a land that no one protected, a place left to fend for itself. He continued, saying that they'd already given up on being a nation. There was no pride, no fight left in them. Suddenly, a soldier ran up to the general to report. He said they'd found an enemy encampment with about 12 cavalry and 600 infantry. He added that they also saw about 250 kidnapped people trapped in carts. The soldier continued, saying that it looked like they were resting before moving on to another village. They were likely planning to raid more villages. The general stared ahead, his face grim. He declared that tonight was going to be a long night, hinting at the battle to come. The army had set up camp for the night, a sea of tents stretching out under the starry sky. But the peace was broken by the sounds of violence, as some soldiers brutally beat others, showing the harsh reality of the camp. The soldiers continued their brutal assault on the man, showing no mercy. Another soldier yelled, asking why they were running away, and warning them not to kill the guy who was going to war in their place, because he was next. A large man, looking like a brute, offered the women meat and the best woman who came forward first, promising them a night of fun. The women huddled together, a mix of fear and desperation in their eyes. In a desperate scramble, the women ran towards the man, each hoping to be the one chosen. The entire camp seemed to hold its breath, watching the scene unfold. Two guards stood on duty, spears in hand. One of them cursed his luck, complaining about being stuck on guard duty instead of having some fun with the women, admitting he had been feeling it in his loins for a while now. The two guards stood watch under the starry sky, their eyes scanning the horizon. A strange feeling hung in the air, making the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. One of the guards broke the silence, admitting that the atmosphere felt strange. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, a sense of unease creeping into his voice. Before the other guard could respond, a sudden force ripped through the first man. The guard hadn't even finished mocking him for being scared of a wolf when the unseen attacker struck. The surviving guard found himself surrounded by the bodies of his comrades, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. He spun around, trying to find the source of the attack, but saw nothing but the dead. The guard's eyes widened as he finally saw what was happening. He stammered, trying to make sense of the scene, but the words caught in his throat. The fallen guards lay still, arrows sticking out of their bodies. They never saw it coming, dying without a sound in the dark. The commander stared up at the sky, a grim look on his face. He ordered them to send the signal, releasing the pigeon into the night. The soldiers on horseback had done their job. Word came back that they'd secured the escape route, clearing the way for the rest of the army. The general turned to Liesel, his expression serious. He told her to watch closely from now on, sensing that the real battle was about to begin. The soldiers stood ready, swords drawn, and eyes fixed on the enemy. The general declared that this was their battle, the moment they'd been preparing for. The archers lined up, drawing their bows in perfect unison. Every muscle was tense, every eye focused on the target. The air crackled with anticipation as they waited for the signal to unleash their deadly volley. The commander gave the order, fire. A split second later, a swarm of arrows filled the sky, blotting out the stars. The attack had begun. The archers stood in a perfect line, and their bows pulled back and aimed at the sky. Every single one of them was focused, waiting for the one word that would start the battle. With a fierce look, the commander gave the order for all forces to fire. A moment later, a storm of arrows shot into the night sky, creating a dark cloud that flew towards the enemy. Meanwhile, the enemy soldiers were gathered around their campfires, laughing and drinking without a care in the world. They had no idea what was coming until one of them paused, hearing a strange noise in the distance. He looked up, trying to figure out what he was seeing. At first, he thought it was just a flock of birds, but then his eyes widened in absolute horror. He screamed out a warning, realizing they were arrows. But his warning came too late. The arrows rained down on the camp, striking soldiers before they could even stand up. The surprise attack was a complete success. From above, the scene was one of total chaos. Bodies were scattered between the tents as the unprepared soldiers fell victim to the perfectly timed ambush. In the middle of it all, the enemy leader, a baron, was shouting in confusion, demanding to know what was going on. His remaining soldiers quickly grabbed their spears, trying to form a defensive line against the unseen enemy. One of his guards immediately rushed to his side, pushing him back towards cover. The guard urged the baron to get somewhere safe, insisting they would handle the attack. The baron looked annoyed by the surprise attack and turned to his commander. He gave a simple order: handle this and do it quickly. The commander immediately started shouting orders to his men. He told the archers to prepare to fire back, while the pikemen were to set up an ambush at the camp's entrance, ready to trap the attackers. The soldiers moved without a moment's delay. The pikemen formed a solid line, creating a wall of sharp spear points aimed at the darkness. From behind this wall of spears, the commander watched intently. He could see the attackers gathering in the distance, preparing their own charge. As he watched them get closer, he noticed a key detail. The enemy was a cavalry unit, riding on horseback. That meant they weren't just some random farmers raiding their camp. Still, he wasn't too worried. He thought they looked disorganized, not like a real army. He even scoffed at them, thinking they were fools for trying to shoot arrows from horseback. Feeling confident in his plan, he turned to his own men. He roared the command for all of his archers to draw their bows and get ready. A nasty grin spread across his face, absolutely sure of his victory. He told his men that the moment the enemy cavalry came into range, they were to turn them into pincushions. The commander's archers let their arrows fly in a high arc, but from the darkness, the black armored cavalry answered with a volley of their own, firing straight ahead from their horses. The commander just smirked, completely unimpressed. He thought they were fools for even trying to shoot from that far away. But a moment later, his confidence vanished. He watched in disbelief as the enemy's arrows slammed into his soldiers with deadly accuracy. He couldn't believe it was possible. The thing is, these weren't ordinary bows. The cavalry's archers used powerful, reinforced weapons, and they fired with a skill the commander had never seen before. His archers didn't stand a chance. The volley was so precise and powerful that his men were being picked off one by one, their own formation breaking apart in seconds. Realizing his mistake, the commander panicked. He screamed at his pikemen to get ready and stop the cavalry before they could break through. But on the other side, there was no panic at all. The general of the black armored cavalry gave a simple, cold command for his soldiers to form a wedge and advance. Without hesitation, the entire unit moved as one. They formed a perfect spearhead and charged straight toward the enemy's broken lines. The pikemen braced for impact. A wall of spears meant to stop the charge, but the black armored cavalry crashed into them with incredible force, shattering their formation in an instant. Seeing his front line completely collapse, the enemy commander panicked. He screamed at his men to forget the riders and attacked the horses instead. One of the soldiers followed the order, thrusting his spear with all his might, but the weapon just glanced off the rider's thick armor, creating a shower of sparks. The soldier's eyes widened in shock as he realized the truth. It wasn't just the riders. The horses were completely covered in iron armor, too. Looking down at him, the cavalryman with his glowing red eyes seemed less like a man and more like a demon. He could only stammer out the word demons in absolute terror. A second later, he was crushed under the weight of the armored warhorse. The battlefield turned into a complete massacre. The pikemen scattered in every direction, begging for their lives, but the cavalry cut them down without mercy. One of the riders at the head of the charge pointed his spear forward. He yelled for the others to keep pushing and break through the enemy's camp. Just then, another huge warrior from the black armored unit joined the fight. He called out to his comrade, Buru, telling him to leave the rest to him as he gripped his own weapon, ready for battle. The massive warrior leaped from his horse, his eyes fixed on the enemy camp. He yelled out their purpose for everyone to hear. They were there to rescue the captive farmers. On the ground, his soldiers dismounted in perfect formation, ready to fight on foot. Seeing the riders get off their horses, one of the enemy commanders smirked, thinking the threat was over. But his superior officer was furious at the stupidity. He screamed at his men that this was their chance, ordering them to charge forward immediately. The enemy soldiers scrambled to form a defensive line, bracing their spears and shouting to block the attack. But it was useless. The first black armored soldier met their line and shattered a shield with a single, brutal strike. That first break was all it took for the entire enemy formation to collapse. The Gari soldiers moved like a storm, cutting through the disorganized ranks. Every swing of their weapons was precise and deadly, and the enemy soldiers didn't stand a chance. One of the enemy soldiers could only let out a final scream as a Gari warrior cut him down. The difference in their skill was just too great. The fight was a complete massacre. As one of the soldiers fell, his last thought was a question that echoed across the battlefield. Just who on earth were these people? From above, the scene was clear. The black armored soldiers were a disciplined force, moving as one unit. The enemy army, on the other hand, had completely fallen apart, scattering in every direction. Standing at the edge of the camp, one of the rescued farmers watched in awe. Watching the disaster from a nearby tent, the enemy general was furious and confused. He knew from their armor that they weren't the Empire's army, which made no sense. At that moment, another commander with blonde hair came running as someone desperately called out for the Baron. The blonde commander grabbed the Baron, screaming at him to flee to the rear immediately. But the Baron was defiant, vowing to return to his own territory and bring back the kingdom's army. As he spoke, one of the black armored soldiers began walking straight towards them. The Baron turned to his men, asking if they had secured an escape route for him. But before anyone could answer, one of their soldiers froze completely. His eyes widened in absolute terror as he stared at something just behind the Baron. It was already too late. The entire camp had been completely overrun. A captive woman stared in disbelief at the bodies of the guards, while in the background, someone screamed for everyone to run for their lives. The blonde commander could only watch, paralyzed by the speed of the slaughter. Then, a new figure stepped through the chaos, walking calmly past the bodies of the fallen enemy soldiers. Their ornate armor marked them as a leader, and they moved with an air of complete control. The battle was clearly over. The Gauri soldiers now stood over the entire camp, having taken it completely. One of the men approached the commander, confirming their arrival and addressing them as Daisaja. Daisaja immediately gave new orders, telling the soldiers to secure the wagons and for the scout cavalry to get ready to move out. But one of the surviving enemies, cornered and with nothing left to lose, knew this was his end. He pulled out a fire starter, a look of grim determination on his face. He screamed in defiance, charging forward with the burning torch, intending to take everyone down with him. In a nearby cage, the captured farmers cried out in terror, begging for someone to save them. Daisaja's eyes narrowed, watching the mad dash unfold. The fate of the captives hung in the balance. Everything now depended on that single, desperate flame. The soldiers screamed that they would all die together. Inside the cage, the captives begged for their lives, watching in horror as he closed in. Daisaja just watched him come. He was completely lost to madness, promising them a painful end. But then, Daisaja raised his hand. He wasn't moving to block the man. He was doing something else entirely. He seemed to be speaking to the fire itself. Suddenly, the flame on the torch didn't go out. It exploded. The attacker froze, completely confused by what was happening. In an instant, the fire leaped from the torch and wrapped around him. His own weapon had become his end, but it wasn't over. The flames twisted and formed into a giant burning skeleton. The captives and the surviving enemy commander could only stare, unable to believe what they were seeing. It was then that the commander understood. The leader of these invaders wasn't just a warrior. He was a mage. The blonde commander looked completely broken. He realized that in just one single charge, his army of 600 had been cut down to less than 100. The man with gray hair, completely cornered, started screaming. He yelled that he was a noble from the High-End Kingdom, trying to use his title to scare them off. The Baron just smirked. He sarcastically agreed that they couldn't possibly treat a noble carelessly, but then said he was going to press forward and take control anyway. He got even angrier, yelling about the laws of war. He demanded to speak to their leader immediately. In response, the soldiers parted. A figure on a massive, armored horse rode slowly through the ranks. The Baron faced the rider, introducing himself as Baron Alvin of the High-End Kingdom, but the commander just stared back without a word, which only made the Baron more furious. But then, another man stepped forward and called the Baron a liar. He told the commander that the real Baron Alvin hadn't even returned from the village yet. The commander turned to an older man and asked for an item. The old man Rizal handed it over and explained that he needed to speak a trigger word to use its magic. The commander held out his hand and simply said the words, trigger word. Something was about to happen. Nothing happened. The commander had said the words exactly as he was told, but the magic item didn't work. The old man, Rizal, looked completely baffled. After clearing his throat, Rizal realized the problem. He quickly explained to the commander that he wasn't supposed to say the phrase trigger word out loud. Rizal told him to follow along carefully and said the word interpretation. The commander tried to copy him, but it came out as gibberish. The language barrier was a serious problem. Meanwhile, the enemy saw their chance. The blonde knight whispered to the man claiming to be the Baron, saying the battle had shifted and suggesting they make a move. As the knight explained his idea, a nasty grin spread across the fake Baron's face. He clearly liked what he was hearing. Back with the commander, Rizal was getting stressed. He insisted that the word had to be spoken perfectly. The commander took a breath and tried again, concentrating hard on each sound. This time, it worked. A blue light glowed from the ring on his finger. Rizal gasped, clapping his hands in relief as the commander calmly announced that it was done. The commander looked across the field and spoke, his voice now magically translated. He asked if they could hear him. The fake Baron looked up, surprised, and confirmed that he could. The commander smiled, satisfied that the magic was working. Now they could finally talk. The blonde knight stepped forward. He introduced himself as Hugelion Teluman, a knight serving Baron Alvin. The commander responded from his horse, introducing himself as Deshiko Jincheon of the Great Gari Empire. The name meant nothing to Hugelion. He'd never heard of a Gari Empire. Hugelion was deeply suspicious. There was no country called Gari on the continent, and calling themselves an empire was a massive claim. He couldn't figure out what these people were trying to pull. The commander asked if they wanted to continue the fight. Hugelion knew the battle was already lost, but he told the commander he had one request. He challenged the commander to a one-on-one duel. If he won, he asked that the Gari army would leave them in peace. The commander considered the offer. Then, he accepted the duel. Hugelion thanked him for honoring the challenge, but this was all part of their plan. The Baron knew that Teluman was a famous knight. Their real goal wasn't to win the duel. It was to get close enough to take the commander hostage and turn the entire situation around. The two warriors stood in the center of the camp, surrounded on all sides by soldiers. The duel was about to begin. Hugelion faced his opponent and let out a powerful roar, gathering his strength. Suddenly, his sword burst into flames. A powerful aura surrounded the blade. Baron Alvin stared in shock. He realized this was the skill of an aura user, someone with the power of a royal guard. But the Gowrie commander didn't even flinch. He just looked at Hugelion and told him to bring it on. That's when the Baron screamed a warning to his knight. He told him to dodge, yelling that the commander was an aura user too. But Hugelion was already moving. He shouted that it was too late and charged forward. Their blades met with incredible force. The shockwave sent Baron Alvin stumbling backward. Hugelion couldn't understand what he was seeing. The commander's blade had the power of an aura weapon, but there was no aura at all. The Gowrie commander looked down at him and called his technique sloppy. Seeing his knight defeated, Baron Alvin ran forward, screaming his name. He grabbed his knight by the collar, furious, demanding to know what he was doing. But as the Baron shook him, a thin red line suddenly appeared on Hugelion's forehead. The knight let out a scream. In an instant, it was over. The Gowrie commander's single strike had been more than enough to finish him. Baron Alvin was covered in his knight's blood. He collapsed to the ground, completely stunned by what just happened. He just sat there, surrounded by the enemy. He knew it was over. The Gowrie commander's shadow fell over him. He looked down at the defeated noble and asked if that was enough. Baron Alvin just sat there, completely broken. He muttered to himself that it was all too easy for them. Watching from a distance, an old man with white hair realized what had just happened. He knew the defeated knight was an aura user, but the Gowrie commander felt even stronger. Meanwhile, the Gowrie soldiers started laughing, mocking how weak their opponents were. With the duel over, the Gowrie commander sheathed his brutal sword and ordered his men to pull back. But the battle wasn't finished. A new command rang out for the spearmen to charge forward. The old man couldn't believe it. To treat a powerful aura user with such disrespect, it was completely unheard of. As he watched the disciplined army move, he had only one question on his mind. Just what kind of place? The Gowrie army marched on, a disciplined line of black armor cutting through the green valley. Their spears stood tall against the sky. Every soldier moved as one, their footsteps heavy and perfectly in sync. The old man watched them, completely baffled. He thought he knew every major power on the continent, but he had never heard of a military force this strong. He rode up beside one of the generals, a man named Uru. The old man said he had a question and asked him where exactly they had come from. General Uru looked at him, annoyed. He reminded the old man that they'd already told him they were from a place called Gari. The old man just smiled and asked him for its location. Uru thought for a second. He explained that they came by ship and that from their camp, it was about a 3-day journey. The old man's eyes widened. A 3-day ship ride from the lake would just lead back to the lake. The answer made no sense. He looked at the general and told him he was dumber than an orc. The old man continued to press him, pointing out that there was no way out of the lake. He asked General Uru how it was possible to reach Gari by ship in just 3 days. Uru paused, realizing the man had a point. He tried to remember their journey. He recalled breaking through a stormy sea, but the memory just made him more confused and angry. The memory became clearer. They had sailed straight through a wall of water in the sea and somehow arrived in the mountains. Hearing this, the old man's expression completely changed. A thought crossed his mind, and it was terrifying. Suddenly, A shout echoed through the camp. A soldier on horseback announced that someone named Desaja was arriving, and he ordered the main gates to be opened immediately. The guards didn't hesitate. They rushed to push the heavy wooden gates open. From outside the walls, 2 men were sprinting toward the entrance as fast as they could. The messenger, Desaha, finally reached one of the generals. He was covered in dirt and completely out of breath. Yelling that the situation was urgent, he explained that enemy troops were already on the move from the city. Their goal was to capture the local farmers, and he warned that they had to get ready for an attack right away. The general listened silently as the exhausted messenger, Gye Ung-sam, pleaded with him. He explained that he'd ridden day and night without stopping to deliver his report. The general's face was impossible to read. He just stared down from his horse, taking in the scene. Gye Ung-sam looked up, trying to make them understand, but a bearded warrior rode up and cut him off, calling him a liar for showing up so late. He told Gye Ung-sam that the fight was already over. They had just returned from killing all the enemies. The officer then looked him over and told him to go change his clothes, saying he looked like a beggar. With the situation handled, the soldier simply turned and walked away. As evening fell, a sense of quiet settled over the camp. Sometime later, Gye Ung-sam found himself inside, explaining everything that had happened to the captured noble. Gye Ung-sam began to tell his story, claiming he was determined to get his report through, so he cut down everyone who chased him. The general just sat there, listening. He said that suddenly, a giant monster with 2 heads started chasing him down. The general just asked what happened next. Gye Ung-sam boasted that he wasn't scared at all. He claimed he was so fast that he just left the monster in the dust, but his troubles weren't over yet. He screamed that thousands of blue creatures suddenly appeared, all trying to kill him. The general just kept asking for more details. Gye Ung-sam started to sweat, changing his story from thousands of enemies to maybe just hundreds. As the general stared him down, he nervously corrected himself again. It wasn't hundreds. Maybe it was just a few dozen. Finally, the general cut him off. He asked if this whole story was just an excuse because he'd thrown away everything he bought with the money he'd earned over months. Gye Ung-sam just stammered, with nothing left to say. Gye Ung-sam scratched his head, still trying to make excuses. He grumbled that if it weren't for that guy Alvin, none of this would have happened. The general, done with the excuses, called for one of his men, Hui. He ordered him to bring in the bedwetter, leaving the other soldier completely confused. He then clarified exactly who he meant, that guy named Alvin. A moment later, the guards brought in the prisoner. It was Baron Alvin, bound in ropes. The Baron immediately started yelling, furious. He demanded to know how they could treat a kingdom noble this way. He insisted that under international law, a captured noble had to be treated with respect according to his status. The general turned to an older advisor and asked if the Baron was right. The advisor confirmed that he was. The general looked back at the Baron with a cold expression. He agreed, saying he would treat him well. Baron Alvin started negotiating. He offered a ransom of 1,000 gold and promised to get them their own land to rule. The general listened quietly. The idea of having a place to settle was tempting. Then, the Baron got bold. He said since they didn't seem to serve anyone, he'd be willing to take them on as his subordinates. The general's men exploded with rage. Calling them subordinates was a huge insult. They raised their axes, to split the Baron's head open right there. But the general calmly ordered them to stop, telling them not to be rude to the Baron. His men froze in confusion. The general turned back to Baron Alvin and asked him to confirm his offer, that he would take them in. Thinking he had the upper hand, the Baron promised to give them the best treatment. The general thought for a moment. He realized he could play the situation perfectly, not just to get out of trouble, but to gain elite troops for himself. He stood up and formally apologized to Baron Alvin for the trouble. Then he gave the order to release his bonds, and the guards immediately moved to untie him. As the guards untied him, Baron Alvin looked relieved. He told the general that gaining a warrior like him was worth any hardship he had to endure. The Baron bowed deeply, praising the general's generosity. But the general interrupted him, saying he had a concern. The Baron looked up and asked what was on his mind. The general explained that he was worried his men might not get along with the soldiers already in the Baron's territory. The Baron just smiled, telling him not to worry. He said he managed the security forces directly, so there wouldn't be any problems. The general then brought up another issue, feeding such a large force. The Baron proudly announced that his estate had enough supplies to last them for over half a year. With that settled, the general thanked him and said it was time to rest. He ordered his men to remove the collar from around the Baron's neck. But as the guard began to undo the collar, the general gave another command. He told them to take the Baron to where the other captured men were being held. Baron Alvin looked confused as the guards led him away. The general watched them go, his face impossible to read, and the old advisor rushed to his side, worried that the Baron might be beaten to death. But the general just smiled. He said if the man dies, then that's his fate. He then turned to one of his men, Hui, and ordered him to prepare the soldiers to march. The old advisor was stunned and asked why they needed the army. The general sat down, looking completely in control. He explained that the liar had to pay back everything he owed with interest, and he was sending his warriors to collect that debt. He explained that with the Baron gone, his territory was left with very few troops. It was the perfect chance to strike. He grinned, saying that plundering the enemy was the real fun of war. Baron Alvin was furious. He screamed through the bars, reminding them that he was supposed to be their lord. He yelled that it was all a mistake and kicked the gate, demanding they let him out, but the guards just stood there, watching. He finally stopped, realizing his own men were just following orders from someone else. That's when he turned and saw he wasn't alone. A group of rough-looking men were staring right at him. Even locked up, the Baron looked down on them with disgust. He pointed at one of the men, calling them all worthless scum. He ordered the man to bring him some water. The prisoner walked over and held out a cup. The Baron smirked, pleased with the obedience. But instead of taking it, he kicked the man hard, sending him and the water flying. He wasn't thirsty. He was just making a point. He screamed that the man was nothing but a piece of trash. With the first man down, the Baron grabbed another prisoner. The man begged him to stop, pleading for his life. That's when one of the prisoners grabbed another, calling him Crab Hook. He reminded him that he once promised to kill any soldier who dared to touch Baron Alvin. The man's face was filled with anger. He was remembering the day the soldiers came, cutting down everyone in their path. And now, here was the Baron, doing the same thing, treating them like they were nothing. He screamed at Crab Hook, demanding to know if seeing this didn't make him furious. The other prisoners just watched in silence. The Baron stood over the man he'd beaten, completely in control of the situation. Suddenly, one of the prisoners walked right up to the Baron on the ground. He looked down and asked him what the hell he thought he was doing. The Baron screamed, furious that a commoner would dare to even look at him. That's when the prisoner hit him hard across the face. The blow sent him flying backwards, and he slammed hard against a wooden post. He was bleeding and terrified. He started screaming for his guards, but no one was coming. The prisoner grabbed him by the hair. The Baron immediately started begging, apologizing, and pleading for them to just talk things out. But the prisoner wasn't interested in talking. He told the Baron that words were worthless, and the only way he could make up for his mistakes was to die. And with that, he started beating him without mercy. The sound of the impacts echoed from inside the small building. The next day, all the prisoners were gathered in the courtyard. The general sat on a high platform, ready to pass judgment. In front of him stood the man who had beaten the Baron. Next to him, a body lay covered by a sheet. The general just stared down, his face cold and unreadable. He asked the man a simple question. Why did he kill him? The prisoner just stared back, saying nothing. The guards didn't wait for an order. They threw the man to the ground and started beating him without holding back. The general asked the same question again. This time, the prisoner screamed back, asking if he was supposed to just stand by and do nothing after seeing his enemy. The general's expression didn't change. He told the man that revenge was a right granted only to humans. Then he asked him if he even was one. He said that insects have no right to talk about revenge. With that settled, he finally got to his real question. He wanted to know who else had dared to lay a hand on Baron Alvin. The man screamed, insisting that he had acted alone, but the general just watched him, his expression never changing. The general didn't even bother to answer. His guards just grabbed the man and started dragging him off. A huge warrior carrying a massive axe followed right behind them. It was pretty clear this wasn't going to end well for the prisoner. The rest of the prisoners were forced to kneel in the dirt, waiting for their own fate to be decided. The general looked down at them with a cold smile. He told them a nobleman's life was worth 10 of theirs. So, if 9 more of them volunteered to die, he'd let the rest live as slaves. The crowd erupted in terror. A few of the men immediately started begging, pleading for the general to kill only them and spare everyone else. The fear was crushing. They were all trapped, completely at his mercy. But the general just stood there, watching them break down. He calmly repeated his deal, promising to guarantee everyone else's lives if 9 more people stepped forward. The general looked over the crowd and asked if anyone else would step forward, but no one dared to move. The silence was crushing. Then, one man stood up. His family rushed to him, crying and begging him to stay as he offered his own life to spare them. The general was completely unmoved. He simply told the man he still needed 8 more. With that, the guards grabbed the volunteer and started to drag him away. As they took him, the man pleaded with the general to spare his family, even if no one else stepped up. The general promised he would. With that settled, he turned back to the terrified crowd. He ordered them to send out 8 more people. The guards didn't waste any time. They forced the man down onto a large wooden block. A huge executioner told the guards to hold him tight. He raised his massive axe, preparing to bring it down. A scream echoed through the yard as the axe fell. From a distance, the general just stood and watched, completely unmoved. Another man stepped forward, his face grim. He offered his life, bringing the count to 7. Inspired by his courage, others started to step forward too. The count went down. 6, 5, 4. The rest of the people could only watch in terror, their faces filled with grief. The general looked down at them, completely unmoved. He announced they were still short 4 people. He then made a declaration that the families of the 6 men who died would be cared for. They were now his subjects. But for everyone else, the order was simple. Lock them up and use them as slaves. He dismissed them all as worthless trash. Meanwhile, in one of the camp's tents, Baron Alvin was tossing and turning in his sleep. He shot up, startled. A blond man sitting by his bed told him he was finally awake. The man woke up, completely shocked to find Baron Alvin sitting by his bed. He couldn't understand how the Baron was even there, let alone how he himself was still alive. The Baron just told him it was a long story and that he should rest. Baron Alvin explained that the whole ordeal had been a test. He told the soldier that he and the other 5 who offered their lives were meant to live as commoners with their families. Everyone else was going to be made into slaves. The soldier was speechless. He could barely process process what he was hearing. The man insisted that the pain felt real, that he was sure he was about to die. But the Baron explained that was the point. The general never planned to kill them. He was just testing their will to see if they would actually go through with it. The Baron added that General Baru was the one who insisted it had to look realistic. That's when the soldier remembered the terrifying dwarf who was supposed to be the executioner. The Baron just smirked. He explained that to make it look real, without actually killing anyone, the dwarf did something unusual. Turns out, he gave them a butt jab. The soldier watching was completely disgusted and demanded to know why they do something like that. The soldier pressed him for a reason. The dwarf just grinned, saying he had a good one and was happy to explain. The dwarf calmly told him to stick his butt out. The soldier's face was a mask of pure shock and disgust. Before the soldier could even react, the dwarf grabbed him and slammed him down, forcing him to bend over. The soldier gritted his teeth, his eyes squeezed shut in pain. But the dwarf just had this huge, twisted grin on his face. A loud scream echoed across the execution grounds. The next day, the people who didn't offer their lives were put to work in the fields. They were slaves now, and the general's soldiers stood guard over them. A blonde woman and a large warrior sat on a rock, watching the scene unfold. The woman turned to the warrior, calling him Brother Baru, and asked why those people had to be slaves. He paused for a moment, then started to explain what the general had said when he first took over the town of Yan. He explained that the general would only accept people who were willing to take up a sword. If someone couldn't even sacrifice themselves, they'd be useless when a real enemy showed up. For the general, wielding a sword wasn't a choice. It was the absolute basics for any human. That was the most important thing. Baru then mentioned that he'd once asked a similar question to the Grand Envoy. He remembered standing on a clifftop with him, looking out over the vast mountains. The envoy had told him that just surviving is something anyone can do, but enjoying freedom, that's not something everyone is capable of. He looked at Lord Darren and told him it was a difficult path. The envoy used an example, telling Darren to think about pigs locked in a pen. They just eat what they're given, living the same routine every single day until they die. But then he brought up wild boars. When you try to catch one, it'll fight back to stay alive. But it's not just about survival. He asked what would happen if you actually managed to lock one up. The envoy explained that the boar would slam itself against the walls of the pen. The reason was simple, because it understands what freedom is. Even an animal will do everything it can for freedom. He said that long ago, people lived freely without nations or borders. But that peace was short-lived. When greedy people came along, they started wars, taking away the freedom of others for their own gain. That's why, he said, you must always remember why you draw your sword. A warrior without a reason can never become strong. To defend freedom, you must take up the sword. And to take up the sword, you must first know what freedom is. He explained that a blade wielded by someone who understands freedom is different. The weight of a sword held by someone who has never known freedom just isn't the same. He finished his speech with a powerful call to action, asking them to stand with him and raise their swords for their freedom. The words clearly hit home for Lord Darren. He said that they fight to protect others, and if they're weak, they can't protect anyone at all. He then turned to Sarah, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. He looked her in the eyes and promised that he would protect her. A warm smile spread across Sarah's face. She told him that his words were the best thing she could possibly hear. With their purpose renewed, the army was on the move. The entire cavalry unit rode out, a long black line cutting through the forest. They didn't slow down for anything, pushing through the night at an incredible speed. Suddenly, an old man riding with them called for a halt. He was completely stunned, realizing they'd covered a week's worth of travel in just 3 days, and the soldiers weren't even tired. He just couldn't understand it. He pointed out that even the archers, who were supposed to be foot soldiers, were handling their horses like expert cavalrymen. A soldier approached the old man, Liesel, with a message. The grand emissary was calling for him. Liesel got up and followed him through the woods. The general was waiting, staring up at the night sky. There were 2 moons. He turned and finally spoke, saying Liesel's name. The 3 of them stood on a cliff overlooking the strange land. The general stated that this place was unlike anywhere they knew. He confirmed with Liesel that they were different from the people here, and Liesel agreed. He pointed to the sky. The stars were all wrong, but the moon was different, and even the language of the locals was completely foreign. Go Jinshin admitted he had no magical abilities, but he told Liesel that he believed his knowledge was greater than anyone else's in this new world. Liesel's expression was grim. He explained that in all the history he knew, there was no record of an empire called Gauri. The general pushed for one last piece of proof, asking if a nation called Tang existed. Liesel's answer was simple and final. There was none. The general tried one last time, listing the names of other kingdoms from his home. Bikja, Silla. Surely Liesel had heard of one of them, but the old man's answer was firm. He had never seen or heard of any of those places. The silence was heavy. With all hope of being in a familiar land gone, Go Jinshin finally asked the real questions. Where were they now? And where did they come from? Liesel had an answer. He told the general that this place was called the Haiyan continent. He explained that they hadn't just traveled a long distance. They had crossed a dimensional wall. He put it simply. They had entered an entirely different world. To explain how, he started a story from 10,000 years ago about an ancient dragon that traveled across every land. Liesel explained that in this world, there's a magic spell called warp. It allows people to travel instantly, but only between specific, known locations on the map, and that was the proof. Since none of the empires the general spoke of appeared at any known coordinate, Liesel was sure they existed in another dimension entirely. Go Jinshin wasn't focused on dimensions anymore. He wanted to know what an ancient dragon was. He sounded doubtful, asking how Liesel could be so sure about something like that. Liesel's expression turned serious. He explained that they were a great race, simply known as dragons, and the image that came to mind was of a creature of immense and terrible power. Liesel finished his thought. He said that on the surface, a dragon was a being that no nation or army could ever hope to challenge. But Go Jinshin just scoffed. He thought the idea of a world being ruled by a mere dragon was ridiculous. The general then pointed to the emblem on his own chest and asked Liesel if he knew what it was. Liesel saw a strange, three-legged bird. He had no idea what it was and asked the general to explain. Go Jinshin explained that the emblem represented a divine beast from their homeland, the three-legged crow known as Samjoko. Then he revealed the most important part. It feeds on dragons. He patted the old man on the shoulder, telling him there was no need to fear some freakish lizard. With that, the general turned and walked off into the woods, leaving Liesel to think about what he'd just learned. He soon arrived at a clearing where his soldiers were waiting for him, hidden among the trees. The general stood quietly in the woods, his men waiting for his command. He was thinking about his home, a place he knew he could never go back to. He stood alone for a moment, just taking it all in. He looked up at the strange, three-mooned sky and had to accept it. This was where he had to live now. With his mind made up, it was time for action. His soldiers moved out. They ran through the night, heading towards a walled town in the distance. Without a word, they began to scale the stone wall, helping each other over. They landed silently on top and spread out along the ramparts, ready for whatever came next. On top of the wall, 2 guards were on duty. One of them was complaining about being overworked, while the other pointed out he was always dozing off. But the complaining guard stopped talking mid-sentence. An arrow had gone straight through his chest. Before the other guard could even scream, one of the general's soldiers was already there, motioning for him to be quiet. The soldier grabbed him and asked how many defensive positions were in the town. He promised the guard anything he wanted if he just told the truth. Completely surrounded, the guard spilled everything. He told them there were 12 positions and a 5-man reserve team hidden beneath the wall. The soldier then asked what he wanted for his reward. All the guard could do was beg to be spared. A moment later, he added that if it was possible, he'd also like some money, since he had no way to settle down anywhere else. The soldier asked if that was really all he wanted. The guard's fear was gone, replaced by greed. He just told them to give him plenty of cash and let him walk away. The soldier smiled and put his arm around the guard, pretending to agree to the deal. The guard was still thanking him when a blade went straight through his chest. He looked down in disbelief, asking why the soldier had broken his promise. But the soldier just told him that he did listen. He pushed the body off his blade, calling the man a scammer. He looked down at the body and called him a liar. His men just stood there, completely silent. High on the town wall, a light flashed. It was the signal. Far from the town, 2 riders saw it and knew it was time. The entire cavalry was already assembled. The order was given to be silent and swift. Their general then gave the final command. Their only target was Alvin's mansion. With the wall secured, the main cavalry force rode in from the darkness. The main gate was smashed open and the cavalry poured through. Their general led the charge, his presence unmistakable. His men stood perfectly still, waiting for his command. One of the soldiers bowed his head as the general approached. He ordered one group to leave and secure the other gates. Without a word, they rode off to do their job. He then laid out the plan for everyone else. Each squad was to spread out and approach the target slowly, taking out any witnesses they found. His final order was clear. Once they reached the target, they were to wait for the signal arrow and then attack all at once. The army stood ready, a silent, disciplined force in the darkness. The general looked out over the town. There it was, Alvin's mansion. With a single command, the general led his men forward. Miles away, another group was waiting. An old man sat by the fire, lost in thought. The general rode up to the old man. He told him he would be staying behind with a few soldiers until the fighting was over. The man was confused and asked what he was supposed to do. The general explained his job was to sort through the things they found. The old man still didn't understand what he was talking about. He laid out the plan. They were going to raid the house of a man named Alvin. After the raid, there would be a mountain of items to go through. The general then asked him, between the two of them, who would know which items were truly valuable. The old man admitted that he would know better, but he was suspicious and asked if that was the only reason. The general added that on top of knowing about treasure, the old man knew more about the books and documents of this land. He explained that they needed those books and maps to survive in this new place. The old man's task was to find them. The old man finally understood. The general wasn't just raiding a town for supplies. He was planning to conquer this land and make it their new home. He looked out towards the distant town. A soldier stood beside him and confirmed that the operation had begun. The old man commented on their old-fashioned signal, but as he spoke, a terrible thought hit him. He suddenly started running, screaming that they had to get to the castle immediately. The soldier had no idea what was going on. He grabbed the soldier, furious with himself. He explained that he'd made a huge mistake. A town this far from the capital was bound to have a communication mage, and he hadn't even considered it. The soldier tried to reassure him, saying they'd cut off any messengers. The old man screamed back, calling him a fool. They weren't dealing with messengers. They were dealing with magic. He didn't wait for the soldier to understand. He just grabbed a horse and rode off. The rest of the soldiers quickly followed, racing to catch up. They were now in a desperate rush to stop that mage from sending a warning. He knew he had to stop them from contacting the kingdom. If he failed, no one would survive. The riders pushed their horses harder, racing towards the mansion. They crashed into the defenders with brutal force. The mansion mansion's gate was already destroyed. The guards screamed for someone to stop the invaders. The defenders scrambled to form a spear wall, but the general's cavalry was already on them. They tried to hold their ground, but the cavalry charge was unstoppable. The order was to let no one escape, and the soldiers showed no mercy. They swarmed the courtyard, following the command to kill anyone who resisted. The defense collapsed completely. The defenders fought back desperately, managing to take down one of the cavalrymen with a wall of spears. But for every soldier they lost, the general's men took down 10 more. They were relentless. The mansion's guards were completely stunned. They couldn't understand where this unstoppable cavalry had come from. The general shouted an order to Uru, one of his commanders. He told him to secure the inside of the mansion. Uru acknowledged the command immediately. He turned to his soldiers and told them to follow him inside. Without wasting a second, they charged up the grand staircase. As they ran, Uru reminded his men of their orders. He warned them that if even one person escaped, they would have to answer for it. They stormed into the main hall and began to spread out, securing the building. Uru led his men deeper into the mansion. They moved down a grand staircase, stopping in front of a heavy wooden door. He scanned the dark corners of the hallway, thinking it was the perfect place for rats to hide. They found a hidden spiral staircase and began to make their way down into the darkness. At the bottom, Uru raised a hand, telling his men to wait there. He was going to handle this himself. He grabbed one of the men they'd captured, who was struggling to get free. Uru held him tight, annoyed at how much he was fighting back. One of the soldiers then took the captive's bow and an arrow. The soldier walked down the dark hallway alone, holding the bow. From inside a cell, a man with strange glowing eyes watched him approach. The prisoner called out, demanding to know who was there. Before he could get an answer, an arrow went straight through the bars and hit him in the chest. The hallway was pitch black. Uru ordered his men to bring a light. One of the soldiers grabbed a torch from the wall and lit it. With the flame now burning, they moved into the cell. The light first fell on the prisoner, slumped against the wall, but as it moved, it revealed someone else in the darkness. Chained to the wall was a woman with long, blonde hair. One of the soldiers stared, completely captivated. He muttered that she was pretty enough to make a man dizzy. She didn't react, just hung her head silently. But then the soldier's eyes shot open. He pointed at her, shouting that she was the one. He fell to his knees in front of her, yelling that she was a celestial maiden. In a dark cell, a man was being dragged inside, his muffled shouts echoing off the stone walls. Her captor, a big bald man, grabbed her by the hair and warned her not to resist. He chained her to the wall and gagged her, then just stood there, staring. Suddenly, he heard a noise from the hallway. He turned towards the sound, demanding to know who was there. Before he could react, an arrow flew out of the darkness and hit him square in the back. He dropped to the floor. The woman, BL, looked up with relief. Her rescuers had finally arrived. One of the soldiers stared at her, remarking that she was beautiful enough to drive a man crazy. That's when their commander, Uru, stepped into the light. BL stared at the group, confused. She saw a human, but their leader was a dwarf. She'd never seen a dwarf that tall, especially not one using a bow instead of an axe. The soldier stared at her, his eyes fixed on her pale skin and pointed ears. He suddenly realized exactly who she was. He immediately dropped to his knees, calling her a celestial maiden. Beale, gagged and chained to the wall, couldn't believe what was happening. She wondered if she was dreaming. Meanwhile, outside the mansion, the battle was already over. The general's cavalry had completely crushed the last of the resistance. The survivors kneeled before their new master. Their leader, General Go Jinshin, stood over them with an icy stare. He was in complete control. One of his men came forward to report. He confirmed they had cut down everyone who appeared to be part of Alvin's family. The local soldiers listened in horror. They couldn't believe this level of cruelty. The defeated guard stared at them, wondering just who these monsters were. Jinshan didn't even give him a second glance. He gave a simple order to gather the bodies. His soldier immediately obeyed. Just then, he heard something. A group of riders was galloping toward them at full speed. An old man at the front was shouting his name. The general looked at the old man who had just arrived. He asked why he was here already, explaining that he hadn't even sent the signal. The old man's expression was grim. He told the general they had to stop a communication mage. The general didn't understand. The old man said there was no time to explain and started to ask about Baron Alvin's family. But then, he suddenly screamed in terror. One of the soldiers held up a head by its hair, reporting that they hadn't missed a single person. The general gave him a thumbs up, pleased with the result. The old man shouted the general's name, Jayangun, completely stunned. At that moment, a group of soldiers walked out of the mansion. One of them, a huge man named Uru, was carrying a blonde woman over his shoulder. Uru proudly announced that he had rescued the celestial maiden. The general and the old man just stared, confused. The old man wondered how an elf could possibly be here. The general told Uru that the person on his back wasn't human. Uru shot back angrily, saying a celestial maiden couldn't be compared to a mere human. The old man looked closer at the elf. His eyes went wide with shock. He stammered, realizing something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, a purple light started glowing from the top of the mansion's tower. The old man saw it, and his face filled with dread. He knew exactly what it was. The general, however, was completely calm. He asked what the problem was, certain that his soldiers could handle anything. The old man quickly explained that this wasn't a normal attack. It was communication magic, a kind of signal fire that would instantly alert the capital to what was happening here. He said that with the magic already gathering, It was too late to chase them down. The general just stared at the tower, silent. After a moment, he called out a single name, Uru. The massive soldier answered immediately, gently setting the elf woman down on the ground. Without a word, Uru picked up a bow and drew the string back. The tension on it looked immense. The old man watched him, completely stunned. He stammered that it was impossible. He explained that from this distance, even a skilled elf archer would barely be able to reach the tower. The old man was sure their only option was to run, but Uru just pulled the bowstring back even further. He took aim at the distant tower, right at the source of the magic. He let the arrow fly. It shot through the air like a blur, heading straight for the glowing barrier. The arrow hit the magical shield and shattered it instantly. The person casting the spell was thrown from the top of the tower. Uru lowered his bow. The job was done. The old man couldn't believe it. He whispered that the mana had just vanished. He said that even he, a high elf, couldn't have seen an arrow flying that fast. The elf woman on the ground looked just as stunned. With the threat gone, the soldiers got to work. They started clearing out the mansion, taking everything of value. Uru directed his men, telling them to hurry up and move the goods. One of the soldiers brought him a strange, small chest. Uru asked what it was, wondering if it was worth anything. The soldier admitted he had no idea. Suddenly, a loud scream echoed from inside the room. Uru immediately burst through the door to see what was wrong. Inside, the old elf was on his knees, completely losing it. He was screaming about his mandrake extract, yelling about how valuable it was. The general looked down at the mess, and his face hardened. He ordered everyone to get out of the room right now. He pushed his men toward the exit, telling them he would handle this himself. They stepped back and closed the heavy doors. A moment later, a terrible scream echoed from behind the door. The soldiers just stood there and listened. Sometime later, the soldiers had gathered all the valuables in the main hall. One of them reported to the general that the job was done. The general then pointed to some suits of armor and ordered his men to bring them out. Uru asked what he planned to do with them, suggesting they just melt them down for arrows instead. The general told Uru to have his men gather all the scrap metal. He wanted every single piece of iron they could find brought out. Looking at the huge pile of goods, the general realized their carts weren't nearly enough to carry it all. So he came up with a plan. He ordered 40 soldiers to give the leftover grain to the poor citizens. Then he told the others to smash the suits of armor flat before loading them. His soldiers didn't hesitate. They started smashing the expensive armor, which was worth a fortune, into flat pieces of metal. 2 soldiers watched the others work, satisfied with their progress. But while everyone was busy, a hand suddenly burst out from the ground nearby. A man covered in dirt pulled himself out of the hole. He grinned, thinking he had finally made it inside. But he was wrong. The general and his men were standing right there, watching him. The intruder froze. Froze. Realizing he'd been caught, instead of running, the man drew a massive sword that glowed with power. He laughed and introduced himself as Gerard of the Lightning, asking who wanted to fight him first. The general stared at the man for a moment, completely silent. Then he looked at his soldiers and gave a simple order: get him. Gerard seemed genuinely hurt. He complained that even the most famous mercenaries bowed when they heard his name, yet these guys were treating him like nothing special. He declared that he was the continent's greatest treasure hunter and one of the 10 legendary swordsmen known as the Lightning. As he was talking, a volley of arrows flew at him, but he deflected every single one. He stood there, completely untouched. The archers just drew their bows again, waiting for the next order. Not a single arrow had hit its mark. But then, with a big friendly smile, Gerard threw his hands in the air. He just announced that he surrendered. They tied him up. Gerard was on his knees, surrounded by soldiers, with an arrow pointed right at him. Gerard looked up at the soldier. He'd traveled all over the continent, but had never seen people like this before. Their hair, their eyes, their armor, it was all completely strange. He knew he was truly trapped. Just then, he heard a loud banging sound. He looked over and saw the soldiers smashing the expensive suits of armor into pieces. Gerard couldn't believe his eyes. He started yelling, asking if they were lunatics for destroying something so valuable. The general just walked up and called him a grave robber. Gerard shot back that he was a treasure hunter, a respectable profession for exploring dungeons. The general was not impressed. To him, it was the same thing. The general asked if the armor was really that expensive. Gerard was shocked he even had to ask. He explained that a single suit was worth a fortune, enough for a common family to live on for 10 years. But his words meant nothing to them. The soldiers just kept smashing the armor into scrap metal as Gerard screamed for them to stop. Finally, the general raised his hand. He told his men to hold on for a moment. One of his men approached the general, reporting that the rest of the mansion had been secured. The general just stared at the massive pile of scrap metal, thinking. Gerard watched, completely miserable. All he could think about was his lost money. He started explaining that he was a treasure hunter. Usually, he makes money exploring dungeons, but during a war, he has to take odd jobs to get by. He said he heard Baron Alvin had taken his troops away to the mountains. For the best treasure hunter on the continent, robbing an empty house seemed like child's play. He admitted that things took an unexpected turn, glancing nervously at the archers, who still had their bows drawn. But then his whole attitude changed. He put on a big smile and claimed that for a swordmaster like him, escaping would have been easy. He explained that the only reason he surrendered so easily was because of his curiosity. He just had to know who these strange people were. Before he could finish, the general hit him hard across the face. Gerard yelled out, confused. One of the soldiers stepped forward and told him not to talk so casually. The soldier told Gerard that next time he should share important information first. Gerard yelled back, asking why he should have to tell them anything. But to himself, he decided to just put up with it until his curiosity was satisfied. He had already learned one important thing. As they led him away, he came to a conclusion about the general. The man holds a grudge over every little thing. An old man approached the general and told him that destroying the armor was a wise choice. He said that right now, what they needed was materials and iron, not money. He explained that money loses its value during a war, and the state was gathering every bit of iron to send to the empire. He added that they'd make a bigger profit by using the metal to craft and sell dwarven armor themselves. The general listened, stroking his chin. The old man's logic was solid. He looked out at the horizon. The sun would be rising soon. He gave the order for his men to head back. As the sun came up, the nearby town was quiet, completely unaware of what had just happened at the mansion. A townsman stepped outside his home and found several sacks left on his doorstep. He had no idea where they came from. He opened one and saw it was full of bread and grain. Shocked, he started yelling for help, shouting that something terrible had happened. Another man ran over, but he had even bigger news. He told him that Baron Alvin's mansion had been completely destroyed. It was filled with bodies, and nobody knew who was responsible. The man thought about it for a moment. He admitted it was good that the awful Baron was gone, but he worried that another one, just like him, would show up, take his place. The other man tried to look on the bright side. He pointed out that, thanks to the food, they at least had enough to survive the winter. A grateful smile spread across the man's face. He quietly thanked whoever had left the food for them. Miles away, the general rode on, his mission complete. His army moved quickly through the mountains, their carts loaded with iron, leaving the town far behind. But they weren't traveling alone. Gerard, the treasure hunter, was tied up in a cage on one of the carts, screaming for them to stop as they bounced along the rough road. As the army marched on, Gerard complained loudly from inside his cage. The bumpy ride was absolute torture. Turns out, the soldiers weren't happy about it either. One of them pointed out how badly made the wheels were and ordered his subordinate to report the problem to the general. Gerard watched the soldiers, his mind racing. He suddenly realized they were heading straight for the dangerous Raganza mounts. He studied his captors carefully. The cavalrymen wore full-body scale mail, and even their horses were covered from head to toe. But the strangest thing was their energy. Gerard couldn't read their mana at all. Even as a swordmaster, he had no idea how strong they were. A chill went down his spine. He understood that if he had tried to fight back then, he never would have escaped. But just as quickly, his worry vanished. He suddenly put on a pair of glasses and smirked, deciding he was worrying for nothing. He tried to stand up, but a guard immediately shoved him back down, telling him to stay put. Gerard just smirked. He had a plan. And just like that, the cart exploded. The guard was thrown clear, and Gerard was sent flying, landing hard on the dirt road. One of the soldiers screamed that the prisoner had escaped. The archers immediately drew their bows, ready to fire, but he was too fast. Arrows rained down, but every single one missed him as he weaved through the attack. Before anyone could react, he vaulted over a horse and landed on another cart. He was heading straight for a weapon. He held up his arm, revealing a glowing bracelet. Suddenly, he could understand everything they were saying. The general calmly gave his orders. He told his men to keep the other prisoners under control and surround Gerard, forming a wall so he couldn't reach any weapons. But it was too late. Gerard just smiled, holding the sword he'd just grabbed. He sarcastically wondered what he was supposed to do, since he was already armed. The soldiers were stunned. One of them couldn't believe his eyes, wondering how such a huge sword could have come from that tiny bag. Gerard leapt off the cart, landing with the massive sword in hand. He calmly asked if it was time for him to make his escape. The soldiers formed a circle around him, but Gerard didn't look worried at all. He was finally armed, and he was ready for a fight. He smirked, casually asking them if it was time for him to make his escape. Without another word, he lunged at the soldier closest to him, ready to cut him down. But the soldier met his blade perfectly. The clash of steel echoed as the attack was stopped cold. Gerard jumped back, putting some space between himself and the soldiers. He was completely shocked. He'd assumed their heavy scale mail would make them slow, but they'd blocked his strike like it was nothing. He decided to forget about the commander for a moment. He needed to see what these regular soldiers were really made of. He charged in again, but this time was different. A strange blue energy started to glow around his blade as he swung, but the soldier blocked the glowing blade again. The impact was huge, and Gerard looked genuinely shocked. He hadn't expected this kind of defense from a normal soldier. The force of the block sent him staggering backward. He landed on his feet, but the soldiers were already in formation, waiting for his next move. He was furious. He couldn't believe that even the regular soldiers were this tough, and he yelled out in frustration. He realized if there were more soldiers like them, escaping was going to be almost impossible. For a second, it looked like he was about to give up, but then he tightened his grip on his sword. He told himself that giving up just wasn't his style. A confident grin spread across his face. He was done thinking. It was time to fight for real. He charged back into the fight, this time taking on multiple soldiers at once. Sparks flew as their swords clashed again and again. Gerard was a blur, moving through the soldiers with incredible speed. But from the back, the general just watched calmly, taking it all in. The general remarked that the prisoner was useful. One of his men agreed, adding that his swordsmanship was very well balanced. But the general corrected him. It wasn't his skill that was impressive. It was his courage. Even knowing he was trapped, the man fought without any hesitation. They realized this could take a while, since the cavalry couldn't use their full power on foot. The bearded man suggested suggested they send in a skilled swordsman to end it. The other officer asked who they had available for the job. Someone in the group said that the liar was their best option. A soldier with spiky hair and a cocky grin stepped forward, clearing his throat expectantly. The general turned to his officer and asked him suspiciously if he was lying right now. Hearing this, the man called the liar suddenly looked a lot less confident. Just then, an old man with long white hair rode up to the group asking about the commotion. A soldier explained that they'd captured a grave robber at the castle and he was trying to escape. The old man watched the fight carefully. He had a strange look on his face, muttering that he felt like he'd seen that man somewhere before. The fight was still a blur of motion. Gerard weaved between the soldiers, his blade deflecting every strike they threw at him. And through it all, the general just watched from his horse, completely calm. Gerard was completely surrounded, twisting and blocking as the soldiers' attacks came from all sides. But they moved like a single unit, their attacks perfectly timed. He was getting pushed back hard. He realized he couldn't win a long fight. Their teamwork was just too good, and the longer it went on, the worse his chances were. He had to end this now, so he decided to stop holding back. Blue lightning started crackling around his sword. He roared, challenging them to try and block his next move. The soldier saw the attack coming and braced for impact. Gerard brought his electrified blade down with incredible force. But one soldier stepped forward to meet it head on, as if questioning if that was all he had. Gerard couldn't believe it. The soldier had stopped his attack cold, and he'd done it without even using sword aura. Gerard moved like a blur of blue lightning. He cut through the soldier's defenses, his electrified blade moving too fast for them to even react. He stood over the fallen soldiers and made it clear he was done holding back. Watching from his horse, one of the older men's eyes went wide. He knew exactly who this was, shouting his name, Gerard of the Thunder. The general asked if he knew him. The old man explained that Gerard was one of the 10 great swordsmen of the continent, a true swordmaster. Realizing who they were up against, the old man screamed that they had to stop him immediately. But Gerard was already a whirlwind of blue energy, tearing through the soldiers. He cornered one of the soldiers, raising his glowing blade for the final strike. A huge blast of energy erupted from his sword, sending a nearby cart flying into the air. The soldier on the ground could only stare, stunned by the raw power. That's when a figure stepped in front of the fallen soldier. It was the general. He ordered everyone to fall back, telling them that he would face this guy himself. Gerard couldn't believe it. His massive longsword had been stopped by such a plain-looking blade. He realized the man in front of him was incredibly strong, but it wasn't the general who answered. Another warrior stepped forward, introducing himself as Sam. He told Gerard he was impressed and challenged him to a match. Without another word, Gerard charged. His sword crackled with blue lightning as he prepared to strike. A massive wave of energy exploded from Gerard's sword, but Sam just stood there, looking completely unfazed. Gerard was furious that he was being laughed at. Sam calmly identified the energy as true sword aura. Gerard had no idea what he was talking about. He didn't care what it was called. He lunged forward, swinging his electrified blade with everything he had. The two of them moved in a blur. Gerard's lightning sword met Sam's steel in a flash of sparks. The exchange was over in an instant. Gerard was knocked to the ground, but he was already pushing himself back up, his sword still crackling with power. The fight started again, and this time it was even faster. Gerard's lightning blade crashed against Sam's sword over and over. Sparks flew everywhere as they moved in a complete blur. Gerard channeled all his energy into his blade. A massive wave of blue lightning exploded from the point where their swords met, lighting up the whole area. The force of the blast was huge, sending Gerard flying backward. He slid across the ground, but kept his grip on his sword, while his eyes still locked on his opponent. But Sam just stood there. He hadn't moved an inch. The massive attack hadn't even scratched him. Gerard was bleeding from his mouth, completely stunned. He watched as Sam simply turned around to walk away. He couldn't believe it and screamed, furious that his opponent would dare to ignore him after just one exchange. That seemed to get Sam's attention. He stopped and tightened his grip on his sword. Gerard was still on the ground, trying to figure out what was happening. That's when Sam moved, rushing forward with incredible speed. He gripped the hilt of his sword with both hands. This time, he wasn't just defending. Gerard watched, confused. Before he could even process it, Sam was on him, moving faster than he'd ever seen. The warrior stopped just short of him. Gerard felt a strange shift in the air. It was like all the energy in the forest was being pulled into one spot. He knew he was in serious trouble. Gerard summoned his lightning one more time, pouring everything he had left into his blade. He braced for the attack. For a split second, everything went completely silent. Sam just stood there, waiting. That's when Gerard realized it wasn't just quiet. The very air around them had stopped moving. He looked up, trying to understand what was happening. He felt a slight pressure, but it wasn't wind. It was coming from Sam's blade. He held it high, ready to end the fight with a single cut. Sam brought his sword down with incredible force. The strike shattered the ground, sending dirt and splinters flying everywhere. He watched the dust settle, his eyes sharp and focused. But when the smoke cleared, Gerard was gone. A moment later, a crazy laugh echoed through the trees. Turns out, he'd jumped back just in time. Sam just stood there, completely unfazed. Gerard raised his sword, not to attack, but as a sign of respect. He admitted that Sam's swordsmanship was incredible. The warrior nodded, saying he felt the same way about Gerard. They both had the same look on their faces. This was the kind of fight they lived for. Gerard was ready for another round, but as he raised his sword, he stopped. He looked down and saw a crack running along the blade. He cursed under his breath, realizing his expensive weapon couldn't handle the impact. With the fight over, Gerard tossed his dagger into a suit of armor sitting in a nearby cart. He jumped into the cart, telling the driver to get moving. Then he just laid back, like he didn't have a care in the world. Miles away, the general was getting his troops organized, yelling at them to hurry up. That's when he spotted Gerard and ordered his men to go grab him. Turns out, his escape didn't last long. The caravan moved on, with Gerard now tied up and forced to run alongside one of the carts. He was furious. Later that night, in a clearing deep in the woods, a few of the soldiers gathered for something. One of them gave the signal, and they all started digging into the dirt with their blades. After a bit of work, they finally hit something. The soldiers looked thrilled, relieved that they'd found it. One of them reached in to pull out what looked like a pot, but when he looked inside, he froze. A dark, looming shadow had appeared right behind them, and they could only gasp in terror. Turns out, the shadow was a massive dwarf. Soldiers immediately dropped to the ground, begging General Baru for mercy. They tried to explain they'd only used leftover grain and were planning to offer the drink to him. One of the soldiers was still trembling on the ground, but then he paused, confused. The reaction wasn't what he expected. He looked up and saw the massive dwarf general standing right over him, axe in hand. But instead of being angry, General Baru took a big drink from a bowl. He let out a huge shout, yelling about how well the liquor had aged. Soon, everyone was sitting together, sharing the pot of makgeolli. One of the dwarves commented that it was like soup, but went down really smooth. One of the soldiers admitted how scared he'd been, thinking an enemy was sneaking up on them. General Baru just laughed. The soldier then got curious and asked what the liquor from this world tasted like. The general said their drink was good too, but he and the other dwarves shared a look, all agreeing on what was truly the best. They all roared that beer was the best. The soldiers just stared back, completely clueless. They had no idea what beer even was. The dwarves kept talking about this drink called beer, describing its sharp fizz. The soldiers listened, admitting they'd like to try it sometime. One of the older dwarves turned to the one with the red beard, Merwin. He said since the soldiers shared their drink, it was only fair they treat them back. So, a little while later, they were all gathered around a table with mugs full of beer. They took their first sip together. One of the soldiers slammed his mug down, his eyes wide. He couldn't believe how good it tasted, and asked the dwarves what in the world they used to make it. Merwin just smiled and said it was made from barley. The soldier's face fell. He asked nervously where exactly they got the barley from. One of the drunkard dwarves started to blurt out something about the warehouse before his friends quickly covered his mouth. That's when it hit the soldiers. They finally knew why barley had been missing from their meals. The soldiers immediately started panicking, yelling that they'd all be killed if anyone found out. This was way more serious than using leftover rice. But Merwin just looked at them, completely unfazed, and told them not to worry. He waved his hands, promising to take care of everything. He told them to just relax and keep drinking, insisting it was all fine. The soldiers were sweating bullets, but Merwin just held up a finger. He explained that in the dwarf world, there's a saying, it's only a foul if you get caught. Otherwise, it's a skill. Right on cue, a voice roared that they were caught. The door to the room exploded inward, and the dwarves' faces went pale. A huge man with a dark mustache glared down at them. He confirmed that his name, Stone, meant rock, and then ordered the 3 dwarf rocks to come out. Turns out, their punishment was hard labor. The 3 dwarves were sent out to a field to farm under the watchful eyes of 2 guards. The 2 men watched them, and one commented that he'd never seen farming dwarves in his life. The other agreed, saying he hadn't even heard of such a thing. But there they were, forced to till the soil, pull a plow, and carry water. It was clearly work they were not used to. From a watchtower above, Garling Stone screamed at them. He ordered the rocks to finish before sunset, yelling that they had to work themselves to death if they wanted to live.